This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, all together again, which is a good thing. Busy day.
She's been
heading out.
lying on a beach somewhere, probably.
Yeah, outstanding guests involved. Today, Amanda Lynam's going to get us started strong. I see Andrew Sheets wiring up in London right now with Morgan Stanley. Young Ives will be with us.
Okay.
On Tesla, I don't care. I'm really interested what he thinks about this derby right now. Like every 30 minutes, somebody's coming out on a readjustment of iPhone sales. I don't know if that's important. On the Eastern Mediterranean, Robert Kaplan with us, and Wendy Schiller will be with us from
very
Brown
good.
University. So what are you seeing on the screen? What are you looking at in the launch pad?
I'm looking at a little bit of just weakness again here, Tom, on the market. A little bit of red on the screen here. The market's trying to
Jobs
adapt.
Day.
Yeah, Jobs Day coming up tomorrow. That'll be big. We had some better than expected ADP numbers earlier in the week. I guess that gives you a little sense of trend here, but we'll get a sense of the labor market because that seems to be what the Fed's focused on, Tom, here. They feel like they've got inflation generally under control, so now they're looking at employment.
One of the themes here, and we'll look at the labor economy, claims today, the survey, 221,000, which is still, I think Mr. Greenspan would call that quiescent as well. We welcome all of you on YouTube. On YouTube, subscribe at Bloomberg Podcast. I had a meeting. I walk into the room. There's 15 people in the room.
Yeah.
3 interns, in the chairs.
Sure.
They don't speak. They're just sitting behind and take it all in.
Okay.
And we went over the YouTube data because there's lots. It's amazing.
They give you lots of
We're
data.
above 42 people watching.
Excellent.
It's just amazing.
So they're all in
Thank you,
Pennsylvania.
out
They're all
on
the swing
YouTube.
voters.
Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Good morning on your commute across the nation. Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. Good morning in a quarter from Washington to New York. To Boston. From the Interactive Broker Studios of Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo back finally.
We are. Good morning. And right now we have futures. They're falling. Investors kind of shifting their attention to tomorrow's U.S. payrolls data, more clues on the Federal Reserve's next policy move. Today, like Tom said, we get a read on initial jobless claims for last week. That comes out at 8:30 Wall Street time. We also have reports on services, factory orders, and durable goods orders. So we have NASDAQ futures down about 0.2%. Same for Dow futures and S&P futures. We have the 2-year yield at 3.66%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 3.81%, and that's up 2 basis points. Oil extending its gains, rising tension in the Middle East. Right now, Brent crude up more than 1.5% at $75 a barrel. WTI crude up 2% at $71 a barrel. A few companies making news. OpenAI, the company raised $6.6 billion, its latest funding round, valuing the company at $157 billion. And we have shares of NVIDIA up 1%. Jensen Huang told CNBC that demand for its new Blackwell chip is, quote, insane. And shares of Levi Strauss.
CFA.
Insane. Yeah. Levi Strauss down 11%. The company lowered its revenue growth outlook for the full year. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
We're going to rip up the script right now. Head of Compliance, Goldman Sachs just called in and said Amanda Lynam, when she was a sell-side analyst at Goldman Sachs, never wrote a report with the word insane. Why does tech get a free pass on this malarkey?
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me.
With BlackRock is with us this morning.
And I think in the credit market, there are certain sectors that have just such strong financial flexibility, and so they benefit from having cushions that.
Their rule book is different. If you were covering, if you were covering Procter & Gamble, name the firm, and you said their revenue for toothpaste looks insane, you'd be sitting with your counsel.
Yeah, I mean, I think just in the backdrop, there's all these paradigm shifts that are happening in the investing landscape, and tech is obviously at the forefront of that with artificial intelligence. But it's funny having covered companies, sectors just ebb and flow in terms of what's making news, but more so what's actually impacting the investing landscape, and that ebbs and flows over time.
To global macro credit at BlackRock, Are we in an insane bull market, and how does that affect your world?
Our view is that it's really dependent upon the growth backdrop validating the credit spreads that we see right now, which were at the tight end of the range and which are quite resilient. There's a lot of focus on, can the Fed deliver the cuts that are priced in? Our view on this is that if the Fed cuts less than what is priced in because growth is just so good, that is an easily digestible backdrop for corporate credit, and I think that's something that we would like to see.
John Tucker has been reporting that the month of September was like the biggest month ever for new issuance. Do you guys buy everything that Wall Street puts on the tape?
Well, there is a lot of gross issuance, but actually, if you dig under the surface, there's not a lot of net issuance in this market, especially in the leveraged finance market. So if you want to stay invested, you have an opportunity to do that in the new issue market. I would say the other technical factor that's happening alongside limited net new supply, alongside yield-based demand from investors, we have higher coupons that are getting reinvested into this market all the time. So a lot of the questions that we get from investors, why are spreads so tight? We can point to actually a case for spreads to go tighter from here. We're expecting some near-term volatility around the election, but there actually is a case for us to be tighter than this. We were tighter than this as recently as mid-2021 when yields were lower and there wasn't such a supportive backdrop. So I think that the technicals in the corporate credit market, to your question on supply, are really astounding.
So what are you guys buying these days? Are there sectors you like? Are there durations you like? How are you kind of focusing?
So I would say first and foremost at the sector level, financials look attractive still to us, first and foremost because of valuations. There's room for that.
So JP Morgan's going to report on the 11th.
Upcoming
on the
next week.
12th, they're going to come out with a bond issue like they always do.
Right.
That's something you'd be interested in.
Well, I think in general, I think just taking a step back and leaving companies outside of it, we have a lot of moving parts with freight disruptions potentially on the ports, right? For a lot of non-financials, they're dependent upon shipping their goods across international waters, right? The supply chain disruptions can really impact. And so I think if you're in an environment where growth is above trend, we had some good data on the U.S. consumer even last week. We have an uptick in M&A that's happening on the strategic side already with more to come. I think that's a good backdrop for financials.
Right.
In general, it's been a lower quality rally across the corporate credit market. And I think there are pockets of that where we're definitely comfortable. High yield relative to IG, even within IG. When you start to get all the way down in the credit spectrum and the rating quality, you have to be more judicious.
Jennifer did a lovely tour de force with Mark Rowan of Apollo yesterday. It was a real, pro. Joel Levinson hung on every word of it. Of course, taking notes.
Yeah, credit geeks.
Amanda Lynam on private credit.
Yes.
What's the shadow? What's the risk out there?
Well, we have a pretty constructive view on private credit in terms of the growth opportunity. We think that we're far from being saturated. I think what the industry needs to do is preserve the rigor in valuations and investor education as the addressable market of investors expands. So we've already seen an addressable market of borrowers expand. We've seen borrowers tap the private credit markets, even though they have access to the public markets. As this market expands to a wider range of investors, it needs to be crisp about illiquidity risks.
But does the Lisa Mateo family office have any transparency on private credit?
Actually,
do they know what garbage you're buying? Oh, excuse me.
I think it's actually quite good risk. There are two things to keep in mind, Tom. One is, as the market has grown, investors have been more selective about where they're deploying capital. They've been focusing on established managers with 4 or more vintages in the market as opposed to new entrants. That trend continues. That's according to data from Preqin. The other interesting thing, there's a perception that syndicated markets or public debt markets equal transparency, but actually a large portion, for example, of the public leveraged loan market syndicated leveraged loan market doesn't have publicly available financials, right? So there actually are nuances in the credit market where you think that in the syndicated leveraged loan market there's a wide degree of publicly available financials. But
she said vintages. I'm trying to get to 2007 bone. Ask one more question.
Amanda, so how far out in duration are you guys comfortable these days? I mean, I considered my famed 2-year Treasury 3.66%. What do I need to do beyond that?
I think there's a lot priced in terms of rate rally in the intermediate and long end of the curve. We'd be comfortable going out into the belly of the curve, so intermediate, so 5 to 7 years.
Okay.
But I think once you start to get out to the longer part of the U.S. Treasury curve, you need to be focused on things like the deficits, like supply, like increased term premium. Realize that it's kind of been this overhang for a long period of time, but we do think that a lot is priced in terms of rate cuts all the way out towards the end of the curve, and actually would not be surprised to see that widen from here.
Have an insane day.
Yeah.
I'm begging you. With what you guys are doing in crypto, I need an insane Amanda Lynam memo on the linkage of your debt world into the crypto enthusiasm of BlackRock. Amanda Lynam with us today, of course, with Global Macro Credit with BlackRock as well. Futures are negative 13, down negative 127. The VIX is quiescent with all that's going on.
I love that.
I'm
Still below
thinking
20, Tom.
21, 22 VIX.
Yep.
And it's not happening.
That's a little bit higher here, but still below 20 here, Tom. So we'll let you know when it goes above 20.
Yeah.
That'll start getting our attention.
Oil elevated up
Yep,
2%.
yep.
Brent 75.44. Yeah, there's some tension out there today.
There is. I mean, and again, the geopolitical risk, you don't know where this thing is going to end in the Middle East.
Yes.
And what would be the response of
That is.
Israel. So let's just take some risk off the table.
Right now, with our news in New York City, was Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa. Israel's warplanes bombed Beirut overnight after 8 of its soldiers were killed in southern Lebanon in ongoing ground battles against Hezbollah. 9 people died in the center of the Lebanese capital after an Israeli strike on a medical site affiliated with Hezbollah. Bloomberg's Jumana Bersechi is in Dubai and says this is the most active front in the Lebanon border region.
So this is actually the most active front in the context of the broader regional conflict that's going on here. And we know since the beginning of the week that Israel has started these ground incursions on the southern border of Lebanon. They have said that they are conducting targeted ground raids. Now, alongside that, airstrikes have continued amongst in areas around the suburbs of Beirut, the eastern Bekaa, which is close to the Syrian border. More fatalities have been recorded overnight.
Bloomberg's Jumana Bersechi in Dubai. President Biden took an aerial tour of the devastation left by Hurricane Helene in the Carolinas. A briefing on the ground, the president spoke about the impacted communities.
There are no Democrats or Republicans, only Americans. And our job is to help as many people as we can, as quickly as we can, and as thoroughly as we can.
Biden called for putting politics aside to help those devastated from the storms. The death toll from Hurricane Helene has topped 180, and many people remain unaccounted for. President Biden plans to tour disaster areas in Georgia and Florida today. Prosecutors say Donald Trump laid the groundwork to try to overturn the 2020 election even before he lost and knowingly pushed false claims of voter fraud. A newly unsealed court filing submitted by special counsel Jack Smith lays out fresh details and argues that the former president is not entitled to immunity from prosecution. Global news, 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I am Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Back when baseball mattered, there was a pecking order, and we all knew the actual real people played American Legion ball. He was American Legion Player of the Year in 1989. Alan Trammell, yesterday in the locker room with the Detroit Tigers, 66 years old. 7 of the Tigers could be his grandchildren.
You know that he is triple the age of a lot of the guys on that team.
You're kidding.
Triple. Oh, I'm so proud of that team.
How are they going to do against the Clevelands?
We'll see.
Cleveland's got like 92 wins. I didn't know they were that good during the season.
Snuck
Wow.
out.
Yeah, they did.
You know, everybody's trashing
What are they now,
on
the
Central.
Guardians? Okay.
For those of you worldwide, the American League Central Division is the doormat of baseball, and they're killing it this year.
By the way, Yankees fans, you can thank us for knocking out Houston.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes.
We appreciate that.
Yes.
What do we have, Kansas City now or something?
No, Tigers play Cleveland.
Yeah,
Okay, Tigers play Cleveland, the Yankees play.
The Tigers have the best seed.
All right.
KC, I believe, has to play the Yankees.
Yeah.
All right.
Which is tough.
Yep.
You know, it's tough. It's like, Judge.
It's getting good now. We got the Mets tonight. The Mets got to win tonight.
Got to win tonight.
They got to win tonight.
Michael Barr, thank you for that Tigers report. We have to do that, folks. It's in his agreement, page 32. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Now look at some.
television and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Interactive Brokers Portfolio Analyst. Consolidate and analyze all your financial accounts on one powerful dashboard for free. Sign up for Portfolio Analyst at ibkr.com/free PA. All right, global equities on course for the first weekly loss in 4 due to that threat of an escalation in conflict in the Middle East. Right now, we'll head to NASDAQ futures down 0.3%, 73 points. Dow futures down 0.3%, 145 points. And we have S&P futures down 0.2%. Or 15 points. The 2-year yield, 3.66%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 3.81%, and that's up 2 basis points. Few companies making news. Eli Lilly. The FDA said its weight loss and diabetes drugs Zepbound Mounjaro are no longer in short supply. Now that's putting some pressure on copycats who really thrived during that shortage. Copycats of shares of telehealth company Hims and Hers Health, down about 8% because of that. Sticking with health, Aura Health rolled out its next generation smart ring. It has more accurate health tracking, a thinner titanium design. It'll cost you just under $350. And finally, Warren Buffett reaped $338 million from another Bank of America stock sale. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Paul, this is like, we got a rule here, folks. I don't think they get the memo at Morgan Stanley.
No, they don't pay attention.
All decks have to be 7 pages or shorter.
Exactly.
Joining us with a 36-page deck is Andrew Sheets of London. And very importantly, their global head of credit research. And that's very important as he looks at cross-asset right now. Andrew, I want to go to the deflationary fear. I think no one's looking at it. They're not looking at a outlier dollar depreciation. But I got near deflation in China. Can that infect the rest of the world?
Yeah, good morning. It's great to be here with you. So look, I mean, I think if you can look at the global economy, you can say that the battle against inflation may already be won. You know, you look in the US and forward-looking inflation expectations over the next 2 years are well below the Fed's target. And in China, you've had deflationary pressure for a number of quarters now. So, you know, our thinking, the reason why we think, you know, rate cuts are sustainable, you know, even with the equity market as high as it is because inflation has really come down and both the Fed, the ECB, they're going to be able to get to the last mile. But I think it's a good point. I think after a market that was very focused on inflationary pressure, after kind of the bump we saw in the first quarter, I think the focus should and I think is starting to shift towards the fact that it's really growth, not inflation, that's in the driver's seat.
So, Andrew, how do you think our Federal Reserve is going to move going forward? Is it kind of a gradual 25 basis point cut maybe per meeting? Or they kind of front-loaded a little bit there with that 50 basis point cut. How do we proceed from here?
Yeah, so we do not think that the 50 basis points in September was some kind of new pace for Fed cuts. We think that they now go 25 basis points at each and every meeting until the middle of next year. Now that is contingent on our view at Morgan Stanley that the U.S. economy holds up pretty well. You know, we're at 160,000 jobs for the Friday payroll number. I think if we get that, then we're very much in line with a 25 basis point cut in the next meeting. If we get something much weaker, then you know, potentially a larger cuts in the offer. Yeah. But our thinking is the economy will hold up and the Fed is going to be justified in moving at a relatively gradual pace.
I bust Andrew Sheets' chops, folks, over 36-page PowerPoint. It's incredibly powerful. We protect the copyright of our guests. Get that from Morgan Stanley today. Chart 4, page 12, Andrew Sheets. Consumer debt costs remain modest. Right next to it, business formations up. Right above it, more labor and high participation. You construct an exuberance that's pushing against the gloom that's out there, don't you?
Yeah, so I think a really important factor when thinking about a soft landing is fundamentally we're talking about an economic expansion that continues to go into next year. You're talking about more growth without more inflation, right? If we go back to kind of a basic economic model, you need a positive shift to the supply curve to get that, to get more output for not raising prices. And we think the U.S. has a lot of those dynamics. The U.S. is producing a record amount of energy, 30, 40% more oil than Saudi Arabia. You're seeing a record level of labor force growth. You're seeing very strong new business formation. And we think the consumer overall debt costs, because there's still so much locked in low rate debt from the mortgage sector, which is the vast majority of consumer debt, that's also attractive.
I mean, Paul, what he just said, do we understand our oil dominance over Saudi Arabia? I think we're living 40 years ago.
We are. And I mean, I keep forgetting we're a net exporter of oil.
Should I buy a VW diesel?
I think you should. Back in the day, we'll get you a thing. Hey, so Andrew, we just had Amanda Lynam from BlackRock on here in our studio, and she was talking to us about leverage loans and how they're attractive there. How do you think about U.S. leverage loans versus high yield? Because high yield's had a heck of a year so far.
Yeah, so I honestly, I'd agree with a lot of what she said. We think the loan market is pretty attractive. The loan market trades at a pretty significant discount to high yield. I think that's understandable because the market has started to think that, hey, the Fed's going to be cutting rates. You're going to get these rapid rate cuts. That's going to make a floating rate product less attractive. And I think the market's also been more worried about growth. And the levered loan market tends to be a little bit more of a highly levered, more economically sensitive universe, whereas the high yield bond market has become kind of higher quality over time. But if I think about the forecast we have at Morgan Stanley, where the rate cuts are steady but modest, we're still ending the rate cutting cycle around 3.5%. So your all-in yield on those floating rate loans still looks pretty attractive kind of 12 months from now. We think the economic outlook is going to hold up. And so we think ultimately defaults will be pretty manageable. And then, I think this is an asset class. We're constantly surrounded by, conversations around tight credit spreads. And we are also forecasting them to go tighter over the next 12 months. But I think loans are one area where the spreads are not tight versus history. They're kind of at the 20-year median. And we think that's actually some pretty reasonable risk reward for the economic backdrop that we have.
So what are some of the sectors that maybe the sales desk at Morgan Stanley is trying to sell to the BlackRocks of the world in terms of the leverage loan market?
Well, so I think for, the leverage finance space, I mean, when we think about it from a research perspective, I do think this is a market. I think credit is a market where the cyclical risk premiums don't actually seem all that high. I mean, I think credit is the wrong asset class to express a really optimistic view around reacceleration or a much stronger global cyclical backdrop. You've generally had, I think, credit outperform equities across the cyclical side. So I think for us, it's a little bit more of a non-cyclical bias. I think it's also the case where, I think we're a little bit more biased to some of the higher quality businesses with higher leverage, in the view that as rates continue to come down, the market's going to be more comfortable underwriting some of these floating rate structures. That you've really have moved from a scenario last year where kind of people didn't know where the Fed was going to stop, to one where they're increasingly confident about where that interest expense is going to be. And we think that's going to make it a little bit easier to underwrite some of these good businesses that might just have a little bit too much debt.
Paul, you just figured this out. Is this like Brown University Day? We can only speak to people from Brown University?
I mean, but who gets a dual degree in applied mathematics and economics?
It's killer.
It's the last guy I want to talk to at a cocktail party, I'll tell you.
Bob Poole and all. Andrew Sheets, thank you so much from Brown University and Morgan Stanley. Wendy Schiller, scheduled to be with us.
Oh, boy, yeah,
as
right.
well. Futures at negative 14, down negative 133. We haven't talked enough about Jobs Day.
No.
I mean, it's just sort of snuck up on me.
Tomorrow we'll be here.
Yeah.
Where are we going? I mean, Lisa, I'm not sure. I mean, she comes and goes as she pleases.
Yeah, please,
but, I mean,
Lisa,
we'll be
can you
here.
brief us here? Do we have a chance?
You going to be here tomorrow? Thank
You
you.
were doing a
will be
Bloomberg-
here tomorrow.
What Bloomberg event were you doing?
She's hosting stuff all over the world.
It was for Bloomberg Live. It was an AI event, and it was sponsored by Invesco. But it was, talking with some big hitters. I mean, we had the co-owner of the Dallas Cowboys there. We had AT&T, some great companies there. And they're just talking about how they're using AI in their companies.
And with Jensen,
if it's working or not.
like Jensen, did you say it was an insane event?
Insane, like
It was
crazy
an insane event. Okay. Lisa Mateo, front center, really traveling worldwide to improve the Bloomberg message. Lisa Mateo, they're on insane. They don't tell. I don't get
They don't send
any
us
invites.
anywhere. No, they don't send us anywhere. Lock us in here in the studio.
What an interesting show. Coming up later in the morning, Robert D. Kaplan on Israel and the Eastern Mediterranean. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures falling before the bell right now. NASDAQ futures down about 0.3%, 62 points at 19,947. We have Dow futures down 0.2% at 42,394. S&P futures down 0.2% at 5,748. We have the two-year yield 3.66%, up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 3.80%, and that's up 2 basis points. To currencies, the dollar stronger, Japanese yen, euro, British pound weaker. We have Bitcoin lower at around 60,000. Tesla shares down about 1%. It posted first increase in quarterly vehicle sales this year, but investors, well, they just expected more of a bump from China boosting electric car subsidies. And Toyota says that it will delay production of its first U.S.-made EV until 2026. It plans to sell as many as 7 all-electric models in the U.S. within the next 2 years. And Starbucks buying 2 new research farms. It's looking to make coffee more resilient to climate change. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it, Lisa. Now from the Hamptons, he's finally home. 6,000 square feet. You know, he lives down from the hitters, of course. Dan Ives joins us with Wedbush this morning. Tesla, I don't care, Dan. I mean, Paul will do all the AI stuff. OpenAI's raising money.
Huge.
Dan, I don't care. China, South China Morning Post. There's a fire at a Tata factory in Tamil Nadu, India.
Oh, boy.
So they can't make the back panels of the phones. Put up your phone, Paul. Yeah. 2 new iPhones right here, okay?
Boom.
Dan Ives, should we trust people like you guessing what's going on in a China factory or an Indian factory or a Korean factory?
Look, I mean, we've talked about a lot on the show. That's why we travel so much to Asia. It's trying to get some pieces of the puzzle to what demand looks like. And we've seen it for many years, right? I mean, many yell kind of fire in a crowd theater on Apple.
Stop, Dan. Every time Matt Miller, and that's back when Matt Miller had hair.
Yeah.
Matt Miller and I are standing on Fifth Avenue doing this ballet 12 years ago. Why do we do this, Dan Ives?
Look, I think part of it is trying to put the demand story together for every iPhone launch. But me and you have talked about it. We have no doubt this will be Apple's biggest iPhone year ever. And I think everything we see is leading up to it, but also it creates the volatility. It creates the opportunities that we've seen Apple from $1 trillion to $2 trillion to $3.5 trillion. To what I believe 6 months from now, it's over $4 trillion.
And the stock, Paul Sweeney, is being hammered. It's 1.7% from a record high.
I know, exactly.
The dog just absolutely won't go down.
Exactly. And for those of you on radio, Dan Ives may be wearing one of his worst shirts of all time, and that's saying something because he keeps the bar very, very high on that regard. Hey, Dan, I'm seeing some analysts on the street cutting estimates. Is the iPhone, I mean, Tom bought one, I bought one, and I know on your channel checks, your bells went off when Tom and I bought phones, but give us your sense about the unit shipments of this iPhone 16 and how investors should think about it.
I think numbers are going up for the street. And look, the big focus is going to be the holiday quarter, and we've seen that throughout Asia. I mean, September, I think, is going to be a slight beat. But the big thing is they roll out Apple Intelligence going into the holidays. That is going to start what's really going to be called a 2-year super cycle for Apple. And I think that's what the street's focused on. That's why even despite some of the negative sort of noise out there, stock doesn't go down, because I think investors see where this is all heading next 6-9 months.
Hey, Dan, we also had some news yesterday from Tesla. They reported some numbers. Give us your thoughts about what you saw from their numbers, their deliveries, and their production, and what's your view on Tesla these days?
Yeah, look, it was the first sort of incremental positive that we've gotten. I mean, call it in line in terms of year-over-year growth. I think all focus now is not just going to Q4, but going into next year in terms of where you're now going to start to see growth on the story. Price cuts have basically subsided. And to me, next week, it's a historical event in terms of Robotaxi Day will be there. And I think it's the start of this AI story playing out. In our opinion, continues to be the most undervalued AI name in the market.
Where do you, I mean, wow. Paul wants to ask about OpenAI. He's trying to get 8,000 shares. But Dan Ives, state an AI success right now away from ChatGPT and computer programming. Give me one idea of a success.
The messy of AI Palantir. That's where the use cases are exploding. And I think if you look on the enterprise, I mean, look, Tom, we have 84 use cases for AI today. 4 months ago, it was less than 20. On the enterprise, it's exploding. That's why you're seeing the OpenAI valuation. That's why you're seeing Accenture and the godfather of AI, Jensen, and NVIDIA do the partnership. This is just, we continue to say it's 9 p.m. in the AI party that goes to 4 a.m.
So Dan, again, just for those that aren't aware of it, explain to us yesterday, what happened yesterday with this AI. What did they raise? What's the valuation? What is OpenAI, by the way? Because Tom, he thinks he got some shares in his account. He's just not sure what he owns.
Well, I mean, OpenAI is essentially the foundation. I mean, obviously Altman, everything. It's the foundation of generative AI. From a core technology perspective, you got the chip on a GPU from NVIDIA. You got the actual hyperscale players like Microsoft and others. OpenAI is the key of the whole thing. And 150 billion, wow. Go back to a year and a half ago, it's basically a 30 billion valuation. So 5x valuation. Right. NVIDIA and others, this just shows that this is not hype. This is just the start of the AI revolution. I think this is just another sort of foundational moment to where this all heading.
Is it replicable? Can somebody else do what OpenAI does?
I don't believe it's replicable at that scale, just like NVIDIA. There will be others that play into this massive revolution. But OpenAI right now, I mean, they're essentially the only game in town relative to that foundational platform. And that's why Microsoft, NVIDIA, everyone else wants a piece of this. There's no one else that could replicate what they have.
Dan, is there an IPO of OpenAI? Because a lot of folks have been saying, I'm waiting for that, that Facebook event for social, that Google event for search. Is there an opportunity for investors to get a pure play investment in AI that maybe OpenAI would be that?
Look, I mean, obviously you're going to have more and more on the capital markets going down this path. I think when you look at OpenAI, it's to get the popcorn out, right? I mean, they're not doing these valuations. This is all sort of leading to a yellow brick road of more and more capital markets for AI, not just about NVIDIA.
Halloween, Apple earnings. Frame out where the path of Apple over the next 12 months here at $225 per share.
I think the stock has a 3 in front of it over the next 6 months. I think it starts, you're going to have a good September quarter. December is going to be, I think, just blowout relative to what I believe holiday sales. And then services monetization continues. And then I think that's where investors realize the consumer AI revolution goes through Cupertino. That's worth $40 to $50 per share.
Wow. Dan, nobody cares. Paul Sweeney, did you return your old iPhone yet?
No.
In the box?
No, but I'm going to do that.
I already have done mine. Dan Ives, people want to know, when we mail in our iPhone to Fort Worth, Texas, where does it go?
Yeah, and then that gets obviously resold through the channel to ultimately, whether it's in the U.S. or whether it's developed markets, that eventually goes to another consumer that buys an iPhone.
It goes abroad to a consumer. Any idea what they spend on that iPhone? I spent more money than God on.
They have very strong resale value when you look at that. So
they gave me $400.
It could be $400 or $500. I mean, if you look what they're paying you back, the carriers, the resale value tends to hold up very strong, especially internationally for iPhone Pros and Pro Maxes.
What's your single best idea right now?
I mean, the single best idea here to me is Microsoft, just because when I look at Microsoft in terms of where everything's heading on AI, I think there's a stock $550 next 6 months.
Unbelievable. Dan Ives, great. I like his shirt. It's sort of Pontilist. It reminds me of before Matisse.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, if you went to the Louvre, you could see that shirt. No, excuse me, Musée d'Orsay.
Yes.
Down the river
exactly.
with the old train.
Yep.
It's a more Musée d'Orsay shirt.
I mean, I think we could do a special just from the Dan Ives closet. I mean,
we could
do a remote
bright
from there.
lights.
Yep.
Dan Ives out in the Hamptons, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. He is with Wedbush this morning. Red on the screen, but improving tape. Futures, -10. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Israel's warplanes bombed Beirut overnight after 8 of its soldiers were killed in southern Lebanon in ongoing ground battles against Hezbollah. 9 people died in the center of the Lebanese capital after an Israeli strike on a medical site affiliated with Hezbollah. The State Department is trying to help Americans who are in Lebanon leave the country. Spokesman Matthew Miller says about 100 American citizens and family members left Lebanon on a flight on a chartered plane. He says they found seats for other Americans on commercial flights from Middle East Airlines, although he does not know how many took advantage of those 800 seats.
We were able to organize a flight from Beirut to Istanbul to allow other American citizens to leave. It's been a priority for us to enhance the capacity of flights in and out of the region, so we've contracted with additional carriers.
State Department spokesman Matthew Miller. The Justice Department has filed a comprehensive narrative arguing that Donald Trump should face prosecution for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election, regardless of the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has more from Washington.
It is a 165-page document. It has some redactions. In it, prosecutors argue that Trump should not be protected by presidential immunity because he engaged in, quote, criminal conduct as a private citizen when he and co-conspirators pursued multiple criminal means to disrupt the 2020 presidential election. Prosecutors say they would call swing state election officials to testify about the falsity of Trump's fraud claims, and they would introduce the contents of Trump's iPhone and tweets that the government contends were unofficial from Trump's account. Trump's lawyers have until October 17th to respond. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
President Joe Biden plans to tour Hurricane Helene disaster areas in Georgia and Florida today. Yesterday, he surveyed the Carolinas from the air. The death toll from the storm has topped 180. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with the Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Michael Barr. The Athletic out through the New York Times, the great article, Richard Deutsch. It was like a conversation about what MLB does to the future in media. I was thunderstruck, Paul, by how much the Los Angeles Dodgers make.
Oh, it's just
on their local feed.
Yeah, I mean the second largest media market in the U.S. after New York. So the Yes Network for New York, the network for the Dodgers,
the Spectrum,
fantastic because again, 2 iconic franchises, 2 huge markets. The issue for Major League Baseball is all the other markets, Tom, all the other teams, and they rely very heavily on these regional sports networks. And the regional sports networks are really dependent upon subscriber fees. And with everybody cutting the cord. Boy, those.
We're all wound up because there's too much gray hair in here. I mean, Lisa's looking for the first gray hair, but I'm looking here at the World Series last year was the lowest ratings since time began.
We were just talking about this back in the newsroom. Boy, the TV audience and the TV people leading want to see a Yankees-Dodgers matchup. But if you had that, the ratings would be off the roof.
Yeah, but at least you have 2 New York teams, you have 1 LA team. So right now it's looking good. You got Detroit, obviously. So, I mean, so far we're looking good here. And the playoffs have been solid so far. But, the regional sports networks, again, that's kind of the backbone of these regional sports, like baseball, like hockey, like the NBA. So it just calls into question, are they going to put all their content on streaming as well?
I'm going to start tearing up. I got to get my hand. Okay, a disappointing end to a great season. Thanks to the players, the coaches, and the staff for their incredibly hard work. I am humbled and strengthened by Baltimore's love for our team. We will build on our strong foundation and come back next year ready to play our hearts out for the best fans in baseball. Go Orioles, postscript, and choke in October once again. David Rubenstein with a great tweet out there. We say good morning to Mr. Rubenstein and the Baltimore Orioles.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures falling, oil gaining as Middle East tensions rise. Right now we have NASDAQ futures down 0.2% at 19,965. Dow futures down 0.1%, 42,428. And we have S&P futures down about 0.1% at 5,753. Let's head over to commodities. We have Brent crude up about 1.5% at $75 a barrel. WTI crude at $71 a barrel. Taking a look at gold, we have spot gold lower, $2,646 an ounce. Over to the 2-year yield, 3.65%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 3.79%, and that's up 1 basis point. Well, it looks like Amazon expecting another busy holiday season. It's hiring about 250,000 people in the U.S. for the holiday shopping rush, and that is actually unchanged from last year. And Costco reports September sales next week. Telsey Advisory Group says expect a solid report. And since we mentioned Costco, well, it's adding a new precious metal to its lineup. Yes, not just gold. You'll be able to buy 1-ounce platinum bars on its website, $1,889.99 each. There you go. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Is this like Con Ed, where the Mateo House, buys, fractional shares of Costco, so someday you can say you're paying yourself for going shopping?
It'll make myself feel better, maybe, yes?
Yeah.
No.
I saw that. Wow. Joe Feldman out with that report at Telsey Advisory Group. Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Paul, jobs day tomorrow.
Yep.
And I think we got a whole bunch of data today as well. And somebody said it's like the most important jobs day since time began. But I'm sorry, the selection of interviews we've had, the variance is substantial.
Yeah. I mean, again,
going to 8:30 tomorrow.
Consensus is about 150,000. The
Whisper's
number,
lower.
WHIS, about 135, 136,000. So we'll see here. But again, it'll presumably inform the Fed where they want to go with their next meeting.
CPI on October 10th, and then JP Morgan begins the earnings derby on October 11th. Oh, no papers. Okay, excuse me.
Papers.
I thought Lisa was back.
So
Can Kaylee do newspapers today?
Sure.
Kaylee could do that. Joining us right now to pick up the pieces of the election and my inability to move the show forward, Kaylee Lyons-Jones is host of Bloomberg's Balance of Power. Kaylee, the debate changed last night in the vicinity of 6 or 7 p.m. How does the legal news for Mr. Trump change your analysis at Balance of Power?
Well, this is the most detailed the American public might get into his actual activity in the months after the election leading up to January 6, 2021, and trying to overturn the results of the election. The allegations that are outlined in this 165-page document with 80 pages of evidence include things like a White House aide rushing to him as rioters were attacking the Capitol, talking about trying to get Mike Pence to safety, and Donald Trump allegedly looking at him and saying, so what? So it's the kind of detail around his actual not willingness to admit that he lost the 2020 election, which he did. The election victory was certified for Joe Biden. That could come back into the forefront of dialogue. And, of course, that was present on the debate stage as well this week when J.D. Vance wouldn't answer Tim Walz as to whether or not he believed Trump lost.
There's two issues here, Paul. First of all, Saturday Night Live was so good. From now on, it's Joe Biden.
Yeah, exactly.
As we heard from that wonderful sketch. But, Kaylee, I look at this and I go, for whoever you support, couldn't this have waited for November 6th?
Well, that's an interesting point, Tom. This deadline was set by the judge. The decision to release this yesterday was the decision of Judge Tanya Chutkan, who is overseeing this case, who has also set deadlines for a few weeks from now, Trump's team to respond, and then the government to give a final response by October 29th, so just days ahead of the election. But when this news dropped yesterday, right before we came to air on Balance of Power, we all kind of looked at each other and were like, okay, it's October. Does this feel Comey-ish to anyone? As we all thought back to 2016 when Hillary Clinton was running. Of course, this is independent of politics. The justice system would tell you that this is not being driven by anything political, but the timing certainly is something, because this isn't just a criminal defendant we're talking about. It's not even just a former president we're talking about. It is the Republican nominee who is on the ballot on November 5th.
So, Kaylee, we're day 3 now of this port strike on the eastern Gulf Coast here. Is there any inkling from the White House that they want to get involved here? Because there's some saying that, the economic impacts are so severe that this is something that maybe the White House should insert itself in.
To this point, Paul, the White House says they are not going to invoke any labor law. Taft-Hartley, that they are on the side, they are on the side of the union here. And we heard President Biden when he was visiting the Carolinas yesterday on his way to survey the damage of a natural disaster, talking about what could be a man-made disaster if these two sides cannot come to an agreement. But he's really putting the blame on the foot of the shipping companies, not of these dock workers. He wants the companies who he argues made profits go up 800% during the pandemic because of what we were seeing with freight rates and the supply chain restrictions, that profit should be better shared with the union. The union, of course, wants it to agree to its wage terms, a 77% wage increase over 6 years before they go back to the negotiation table to iron out other issues, including automation, which could be a much thornier thing to work through for the two sides. But this White House right now is still firmly on the side of labor here, even if it does have economic consequences. It's a difficult line to walk for Kamala Harris, especially as she visits labor-heavy states, including Wisconsin and Michigan today.
Kayleigh, David Gura is looking at Arizona as his key state. What is Kayleigh Lyon's key state? Can I dare say it's Florida or Texas, or do you got a state that matters more?
Well, I guess it depends on if you're asking me about the balance of Congress or the presidential race, because the presidential race is not going to be decided in Florida or Texas. It's going to be decided in swing states. I probably would pick Pennsylvania because that's going to be the linchpin as to who wins the Electoral College. But if we're considering Congress, which is ultimately going to decide what laws are actually made because the president only has so much power, Texas and Florida could be interesting. If you're assuming that Republicans pick up a seat in West Virginia because Joe Manchin is retiring, Senate seats we're talking about here, and potentially could pick up at least Montana, as well as John Tester, the incumbent Democrat, is falling behind in polls. Democrats would need to pick up either Texas or Florida to try to maintain, if Kamala Harris wins, power over the Senate and their ability to flip the House. Of course, contingent here, though that is seen as more likely than keeping the Senate blue. And in these states, Texas in particular, one poll from Morning Consult just last month showed that Colin Allred, the Democrat, was actually leading Ted Cruz by a point. The Rick Scott race in Florida is looking really tight as well. And you have to consider the ballot measures, too. In Florida, abortion is on the ballot, and some Democrats have told me that they believe that's going to drive turnout and potentially could lead to an upset. One House member from Florida, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, said, "Don't sleep on my state."
Kayleigh Lyons, thank you so much for the brief. Way too long a day for her. 12 to 2. Balance of Power, Lyons and Matthew. And they do it. I thought the 5 to 6 show was taped.
No.
I just thought they, went on
they go
at
live,
10 or
right?
whatever.
No.
They're live.
I'm sure.
5 to 6.
Yep, they come back.
Wow. 5 to 6 as well. Balance of Power. Kayleigh Lyons and Joe Matthew. Looking forward to that. One thing we haven't brought up today for Global Wall Street, noise out of Japan, where the politicians, LDP, got together with Bank of Japan, BOJ, and I guess they had a meeting of the minds.
Okay.
Their independence is different than our independence. And they basically said, we're not going to raise rates again, to generalize it. And we got a significant weakening in yen.
Yeah,
143 out to a 146 level.
Yeah, new Prime Minister Ishiba, unexpected warning against raising interest rates is pushing back expectations of another central bank move this year and increasing doubts about his communication. So a little bit of uncertainty there, Tom, as you call it out, the yen a little bit weaker today.
Renminbi, like a rock, 7.01. I got Lock It Rock on there.
Yep, I saw what you did.
Sick you into the song there. Renminbi, 7.01. We really haven't seen it break down to 6.99. Thank you to Andrew Sheets of Morgan Stanley for that good discussion on inflation as well. I mean, it's exciting. Comerica Park's packed.
Yep.
Tigers are there. They're with Alan Trammell, who was just gifted. I don't know what they're going to do. They're going to play the Clevelands.
Yep.
I read about the Cleveland starting pitcher. I didn't watch 1 minute of Cleveland baseball this year.
But I will.
I'll watch
the playoffs here.
No idea what's going on.
We got the Mets tonight, so we got to clean that up tonight.
Yankees,
if you're a Mets
Dodgers is ginormous.
That's what they would like at Fox.
Ohtani at home plate in Yankee Stadium.
Yeah, exactly.
Judge out there at Chevis Ravine.
Soto.
You got to be kidding me. I mean, that'd be great. But anyways, and thank you, Mr. Rubenstein, for the spirit of the Baltimore Orioles this year. It was fun to watch.
Yep.
I watched them bases loaded. They couldn't get it done. Robert Seager, Hollywood, Dodgers, Tigers. Wow. Now there's a matchup.
There you go.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. We're all together again to give you what we can in economics, finance, investment, and the rest. Interesting morning here. Started before claims here in 30 minutes, 29 minutes, and out of jobs data tomorrow. So we'll see a plethora of economic data, Paul, to get us to CPI report October 10.
Exactly. It's a good week to be an economist. Lots of economic data coming out here, Tom, tomorrow.
Lots of different opinions.
There is. I mean, again, just on the non-farm payrolls, 150,000. A lot of folks say this might be the most important non-farm payrolls print of the year, since we're going to have so much noise coming up in the October, November data.
People ask me, they say, what's the one thing you look at? What's like the weather vane for you across equities, bonds, currencies, commodities? It's just my own, idiocy. The 10-year real yield, the 10-year inflation-adjusted yield, I've got it at 1.5875. We go to 4 digits on Thursday. 1.5875, and it's a lower low. And to the bond people we're going to talk to, I think that's important to see just a ratcheting down in the real yield. Futures now at -5. Bloomberg surveillance this morning. We're brought to you by Cohn Resnick, Advisory Assurance Tax. Is your business future ready? Talk to Cohn Resnick's digital advisory team about strategies, about platforms to drive competitive advantage. We thank Cohn Resnick as well. So lots going on. Robert Kaplan will join us here later on. Looking forward to that on the Eastern Mediterranean. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, El Mateo.
You got it in futures falling. Investors kind of shift their attention to tomorrow's U.S. payrolls data for more clues on the Federal Reserve's next policy move. Now, in about a half hour from now, we'll get a read on initial jobless claims for last week. Today, we'll also get reports on services, factory orders, and also durable goods orders. We have NASDAQ futures down about 0.1% at 19,971. Dow futures down 0.1% at 42,439. And we have S&P futures down 0.1%, 5,754. The 2-year yield, 3.66%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 3.80%, and that's up 2 basis points. To commodities, the possibility of a wider Middle East conflict extending oil's rally. Right now, we have Brent crude up more than 1.5% at $75 a barrel. WTI crude at $71 a barrel. Check in with gold. Spot gold lower, $2,649 an ounce. Stocks on the move. Levi Strauss down 11%. It lowered its revenue growth outlook for the full year. And a few companies making news. That's OpenAI. Yes, it raised $6.6 billion in its latest funding round, and that's valuing the company at $157 billion. And shares of NVIDIA up 1.5% after Jensen Huang told CNBC that demand for its new Blackwell chip is, what was that word he used again? Yes, insane.
Insane.
That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Aisle 3 at Costco is insane. What are we looking for this week at Costco? Which
it's definitely not the platinum bars.
No,
it's not the platinum bars.
How about the Mars bars?
Hot dog.
Supply of Mars bars.
Exactly.
hot dog and a soda is what's that going to set me back?
$1.50.
Nice.
With free refills.
With free
Really? So it's like Nathan's Famous down on Coney Island.
All right.
Great. Lisa Mateo, thank you for that update. This is a joy, and it is the heritage and legacy of Citigroup Research. Willem Bouter, Catherine Mann, now at the Bank of England, and Nathan Sheets build a foundation of having the courage on Wall Street, on global Wall Street, to think bigger and deeper. Nathan Sheets, Dr. Sheets joins us this morning, Global Chief Economist at Citi. Nathan, I saw your essay, The Final Chapter of Post-Pandemic Adjustment. How are we doing? Are we beyond the pandemic?
I'd like to think we are, but its long tail is continuing to influence us, I think. And specifically, this labor market adjustment that we're seeing in the United States is an excellent example that early in the pandemic, lots of labor was laid off. And then we had massive hiring in the economy. We've had massive migration flows. and the labor market became too hot. And now in this kind of final chapter, we're seeing the return to normal. And the big question, as you've highlighted, is that the soft landing in the labor market? Are we going to have job growth kind of take a pause? Or are we more likely to see a sharper downturn and a classical recession? So I really do see this in the context of ongoing strains from the pandemic and its adjustment.
So, Nathan, from I don't know how you want to approach it from a U.S. perspective or a global perspective. Is the soft landing? It feels like certainly in the U.S. the soft landing has been achieved. What do you think?
You know, when I look around the globe, when I look at the U.S. economy, there's certainly a lot to like at the moment. You know, the U.S. consumer looks very solid. And last week's upward revision in the savings rate from 2.9 to 4.8% gives me additional confidence that the consumer is in a pretty decent place. When I look at the performance of the corporate sector, putting on my Federal Reserve hat where I was for many years, maybe the level of asset prices makes me a little nervous, but I love the ongoing stream of earnings. So there's a lot to like in the economy right now. And really the open question and the soft spot is this labor market. And can we have a soft landing? And, you know, many things about the pandemic have been different, but we haven't had one, let's say, over the last 60 years. So it's very interesting. And either way, whatever happens now is going to be historically unprecedented.
Hey, Nathan, here in the U.S., it certainly feels like inflation has been tamed. How about on a global scale? Can you give us a perspective just globally how inflation is playing out?
It really is quite extraordinary globally that the broad themes and narratives that we see in the United States are echoed and manifested quite clearly abroad as well. So early on, we saw this global upsurge in goods inflation. That now has come back down and is at pre-pandemic levels or even below. Services inflation has been stickier, as in the United States, but that's now gradually coming down. And it's opening the door for global central banks to be cutting rates. And the ECB and the Bank of England, for example, already started. And we've recently heard talk from Lagarde and Bailey, even over the last week, and in the UK's case, even today, that inflation's coming off the boil and they're going to be able to cut more aggressively.
Nathan, on productivity, you cut your teeth on this at MIT years ago. Are we in a new productivity that we miscalculate and do not understand?
Tom, I think this is an absolutely pivotal and central question. I think at the moment we're seeing very strong productivity growth. Again, I'm interpreting that as post-pandemic kind of cyclical adjustment. But nevertheless, underneath that, I am a productivity bull. I think this new AI technology that's being developed is fundamental. And I think that out 3, 5, 7 years, we are likely in the United States and over time globally to have a significant productivity dividend on the order of what we saw with the integration of the internet in the late 90s. So I am bullish. I think that AI is the real deal.
Can you imagine going in your AAA baseball?
Yep.
And you got to do an interview with Aaron Judge and Ohtani of the Dodgers. Could you imagine that?
No thanks.
Nathan Sheets, what was it like to walk in the room and get your dissertation done at MIT with Rudy Dornbush and Stan Fisher? I can say in all the years, Nathan Sheets, I've done this, even Summers lecturing his dissertation team, nobody's had someone like Dornbush and Fisher lined up. What was that like?
You know, Tom, when you walked in to talk to Rudy or Stan, you made sure that you had your act together and you knew what you were going to talk about. Now, as a young grad student, that's a pretty intimidating proposition. But fortunately, at the same time as them being intimidating, they're both very nice guys.
Samuelson, Fisher told me once, Samuelson used to get so angry he'd throw chalk Did Dornbush throw chalk at you when he was upset with your lousy differential equations?
You know, what Dornbush would do is he'd just say, I think it's time to go. You've run out of time. He's kind of wave his hand at you. That was time to head for the door. So he was a little more subtle, but he got his point across.
There's a window into the real world of economics. Thank you so much with Citigroup on the pandemic and such. I can't tell you enough, folks, the idea of linking these generations together. We lost Rudy Dornbush so young at MIT. He redefined our study of foreign exchange. Redefining the news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Israel's warplanes bombed Beirut overnight after 8 of its soldiers were killed in southern Lebanon in ongoing ground battles against Hezbollah. 9 people died in the center of the Lebanese capital after an Israeli strike on a medical site affiliated with Hezbollah. Meanwhile, President Biden is looking to deter Israel from any attacks that include Iran's nuclear sites. Bloomberg's Ed Maxter has that story.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed a powerful retribution attack and is getting pressure from some Israeli politicians to really ramp it up. President Biden asked whether he would support that.
The answer is no. I think there's things we'll be discussing with the Israelis what they're going to do, but all 7 of us agree that they have a right to respond.
He says all members of the G7 would prefer that it come in the form of sanctions first. The comments are meant to rein in Israel, something that has not been successful in the past. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Fresh off their vice presidential debate, the 2 VP candidates were out on the campaign trail. Republican J.D. Vance was in Michigan. Speaking to a crowd in Auburn Hills, he repeated the Trump campaign policy of mass deportations.
Here's the Donald Trump plan, and here's the Donald Trump message to illegal aliens in this country. In 6 months, pack your bags because you're going home. That's what we're going to do.
Democratic Minnesota Governor Tim Walz was in York, Pennsylvania, telling what he and Kamala Harris will be bringing to the table in November.
Leadership is not about who you can push down, it's who you can lift up. It's that simple.
Meanwhile, Vice President Harris will be joined by former Representative Liz Cheney at a campaign stop in the swing state of Wisconsin today. In an unsealed motion, Special Counsel Jack Smith says former President Donald Trump resorted to crimes to try to overturn his 2020 election loss, even planning to do so ahead of the results. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Forget about the baseball season. Let's look at a painful moment.
Deep to left. Yastrzemski will not get it. It's a home run. A 3-run home run for Bucky Dent. The Yankees now lead it by a score of 3-2. Bucky Dent has just hit his 5th home run of the year into the screen. And look at that Yankee bench, led by Bob Lemon.
Bucky F. Dent in the worst home run since time began. I mean, that's back when everybody tuned in. The nation was wired in to that game.
Yeah, you dusted off that one, man.
I like that. Thank you to Giuseppe's father for making that happen. What a guy, and he has delivered charity like nobody in baseball. He and his late wife up in Maine, particularly Waterville, Maine. Bucky Dent could have just cashed it in and left. And he has done the charity thing like nobody, particularly up in Maine. We say good morning to Bucky F. Dent. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Stay with us.
television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by IBKR. Financial advisors switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost, global trading, and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges, no conflicts of your interest at ibkr.com/RIA. All right, global equities on course for their first weekly loss in 4, and that's due to a threat of conflict escalation in the Middle East. Right now we have NASDAQ futures down about 0.1% at 19,977. Dow futures down 0.2%, 42,421. And we have S&P futures down about 0.1% at 5,753. The 2-year yield, 3.66%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 3.81%, and that's up 2 basis points. Companies making news. Eli Lilly, the FDA said its weight loss and diabetes drugs Zepbound, Mounjaro, no longer in short supply. Now that's putting shares of some copycats under pressure, like telehealth company Hims and Hers Health, down about 9%. And sticking with health, Aura Health have rolled out its next generation smart ring. It has double the number of sensors, a thinner titanium design. It'll run you just under $350. And in case you didn't know, today is Latina Equal Pay Day. Yes, a day to draw attention to the gender wage gap. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
That's the first time I've seen our global technical director, Ken Feliu, sit up in 15 years. What do you think, Ken?
Well deserved.
He's speechless in there. We'll work on
Exactly.
it. Ken Feliu getting it done each and every day with our crack team. He keeps the interns in line.
He does.
He's really
Yep.
good at that. Joining us right now, running to the middle at Brown University, is Wendy Schiller. Professor, there's so much good work at the Tubman Center and really steeped in our history of elections. Wendy Schiller, when did candidates polarized on the right or left run to the middle? Did George Washington run to the middle?
Yeah, good morning, Tom and Paul and Lisa. And Lisa's point, by the way, I just want to point out that Latino women are the lowest paid on all the demographic categories in terms of wage gap. So let's hope that that changes and changes soon.
Yeah.
So I will tell you that George Washington didn't have that much competition for the presidency, so didn't quite have to run to the middle. That political science, as you're a student of it, you know that since the 1950s, a guy named Anthony Downs wrote a book, An Economic Theory of Democracy, that had a whole argument how everybody runs to the middle in the end of the day. As you converge on the voting on election day, people run to the middle. I think we saw that the other night in the debate with J.D. Vance, certainly trying to sell the Trump package as middle of the road America, not extremist at all. So that was very interesting to see that in the debate the other night.
So just a little bit more than, 4 weeks to the election here. Can anything really change here, Wendy? Can anything happen in these next 4 weeks?
Well, Paul, I don't know about you, but the world seems pretty chaotic this morning.
Yep.
So we keep looking for the October surprise, but it's a multi-dimensional battle, which makes it very difficult for these campaigns that are really neck and neck. Neither one feels really confident that they're going to win. So how do you message to get people now who are already starting to vote, but get those people who are not inclined to vote to get out the door? The Harris campaign seems to be focusing on issues, specific issues like healthcare, which I think is probably pretty smart. Their effort to sort of paint Trump as chaotic and incapable and scary seems to have failed in some respects. Certainly that's the demeanor we saw the other night in the debate. So I think now they're sort of like bread and butter. What matters to the voters of Pennsylvania and North Carolina and Arizona in particular, and emphasizing those messages, whereas I think Vance and Trump are starting to, really clearly saying we're not going to be as scary as they have painted us out to be.
Turnout. What do we expect turnout to be, and is there any advantage to either party there?
I mean, the Republicans always turn out. They turn, there are more registered Democrats in the country than Republicans, but Republicans turn out at slightly more predictable, higher rates. So the Republicans always have a base that will turn out, and Trump has a very loyal base. Yep. The Democrats have managed to generate high turnout levels in the last few elections. So they're counting on those people who have already voted in 20 and 22 to get out the door in 24.
What is the mechanism to boost turnout? I remember on a hazy, rainy evening, I'm guessing Indiana, I'm sorry, Paul, I don't remember, candidate Obama with thousands of people lined up. What's the method, Professor Schiller, to boost turnout for Republicans or Democrats?
Well, what Obama did and what the Democrats have in terms of infrastructure is the capability of literally contacting voters multiple times a day on election day. Literally, did you vote yet? Did you vote yet? Do you need a ride? We can come get you. Did you vote yet? They did that. They literally did that. And that made a difference. And that's their, modus operandi. And that is what the Harris campaign and the Trump campaign will each have to do. Because I think more people are going to vote clearly in person this year than they did by mail in 2020. So really, it's those last few voters who maybe didn't get to the polls by 5 o'clock. Can you still get them to the polls before they close?
Our YouTube live chat, these guys are all smart. They're all like PhDs in international relations. Professor Schiller, quote, Harris made a mistake by not picking Shapiro. Pennsylvania would already be in the bag. Discuss.
Well, yes and no. Right, so I came from a state where people were talking about Gina Raimondo maybe being VP, and there were some people like, "Oh, yay!" And
Stop, Wendy. Rhode Island has half an electoral vote.
I know. My point is this. It is a small state. You hear what people think when you walk down the street. The point is, the people of Pennsylvania could have said, "Oh, yes, we want Josh Shapiro to leave and be VP," but the people of Pennsylvania could also said, "No, we don't want you to take our popular governor. We like the guy." So I think it was a gamble. And plus, there is, among young voters who may or may not vote for Harris-Walz, there is a fairly strong feeling on Gaza and Israel. And Josh Shapiro was not on that side of the issue. So they had to make a decision. Do you try to win Pennsylvania and then lose Michigan, for example? Or do you try to pick somebody who might be able to help you win both Michigan and Pennsylvania? That's the gamble that they took.
Wendy, what is the role, if any, for President Biden here over the next 4 weeks?
Trying to keep the world from sort of literally blowing up. I mean, really trying to sort of say, I may be lame duck, but I'm still the commander in chief of the world's most powerful armed forces. And where we intervene makes a difference. So saying to our, people who we aren't on good terms with, Russia, for example, Ukraine, Iran, if you go too far, we have to get in. And because he's lame duck, he will make a decision that he thinks is in the best interest, not only of the United States, but also of the world community. So that is still a tremendous amount of power. So I think he is still listened to in that respect.
Wendy, thank you so much. Professor Schiller is at Brown University, and we get a huge response when she's on left, right, in the middle, whatever, but her bias to Rhode Island's electoral might is noted this morning. Wendy Schiller, thank you so much. I mean, Paul, it's upon us. I'm still not wired in to our short post-Biden campaign.
No.
I am flawed in that.
Well, I think it's because, Tom, maybe in part because they're focused on these swing states. And New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, we're not swing states. So we're not seeing it as much as I suspect people in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Arizona are, where I'm guessing every other ad is a political ad.
Yeah, well, and we'll make our, I haven't done this yet. What is it, October 3?
Yeah.
I'm rushing it. I should wait. It's like, Christmas decorations before Wednesday of Thanksgiving. It's a little early. But vote early, vote often, folks. Go through the registration process. Go through the mail order process in your state. If you've got one, it's in English. I looked the other day, actually.
Yeah, I did mine.
New York State does a beautiful
it's easy.
display. And, I guess out west they do it better. People say Utah. And, they're the ones that sort of invented this. But whatever your process is, whatever your politics, we have become politically engaged versus 20, 30, 40 years ago. And, of course, we'll focus on balance of power. Kaylee lines with us earlier with Joe Matthew. Really focused there. I should mention David Gura as well.
Yeah, he's wired in as well. He's a real news guy.
With Anne-Marie Horton.
Yeah,
they're all wired into this. And also Greg Giroux, we should mention, is just doing great.
When you want to know, what street is voting where, in any
in
part
Lincoln,
of the country.
Nebraska.
Exactly. He's got it wired down for you.
Lincoln nailed down besides Nebraska football. Futures -8, Dow futures -100. We're 4 minutes away from a crucial claims report off ADP, better than good. Claims here in 3 minutes make it. And then we get to jobs day tomorrow. We're in the middle of key economic data. Michael McKee, ready to go with analysis. Again, futures at -8 from New York City on YouTube. Bloomberg Surveillance.
All right, Tom was just
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lise Mateo. We have futures falling just moments before initial jobless claims for last week, so let's check in with it right now. We have NASDAQ futures down about 0.1%, Dow futures down about 0.2%. We have S&P futures down about 0.1%. We have the 2-year yield at 3.66%. That's up 2 basis points. And we have the 10-year yield at 3.79%, and that's up 1 basis point. While the numbers are coming in for initial jobless claims, the survey was for 221,000, coming in at 225,000. The prior was for 218. That got revised up to 219. All right, as far as futures right now, still the same. We have NASDAQ, Dow, and S&P futures down about 0.1%. Want to check in with Tesla shares quickly. They're down more than 1%, posted its first increase in quarterly vehicle sales this year, but investors, they expected a little bit more of a bump from China boosting electric car subsidies. And Toyota says it's going to delay production of its first U.S.-made EV until 2026. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much. It's greatly appreciated. Paul, what do you make of this? Yields move higher.
Yeah.
You know,
I don't know. Yeah, I
up
mean,
2
kinda,
basis points.
Yeah, as Lisa was just reporting, kind of just a little bit higher than expected, but kind of in that range we've been accustomed to over the last several months.
Some dollar strength here at a 101.85 on DXY. The yen 146.65. Euro, I can't afford to go to Europe. That's the analysis. That's the analysis today. Your economic indicators, they're always brought to you right around Jobs Day by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor to staff ratio, small firm attentiveness, big advisor impact. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about their consultative support and technology. Ira Jersey darkens the door right now with Bloomberg Intelligence. Ira, you guys did your Q4 launch. It was a deck. It was 142 pages PowerPoint from Ira Jersey on what we see forward. Summarize that into the economic data we see now. Lower yields, higher yields.
Yeah, so I think actually for the 10-year, probably we hover more or less, call it 365 to 385, but it's really the short-term interest rates that are going to be of more interest, I think, in many ways, because if the Federal Reserve does indeed do what it says it's going to do in the dot plot, then we'd expect 2-year yields to continue to move lower, and therefore the yield curve steepens, so front-end yields to go down faster than longer-term yields.
So it's been a while, Ira, since we've had a steepening yield curve. We've had an inverted yield curve for several years here, but now we've got a positive steepening of roughly 15 basis points. Where should that be? Where should that 210 spread be, do you think?
Yeah, where should it be is around 25 basis points, according to our model, so not too far from where it is. But we do think it's headed toward 75 to 100 basis points over the course of the cycle. So by the end of next year, we do think that the difference between those two will be pretty significant. And in part because, look, those long-term yields are going to be held back by a couple of things. One is supply, right? Just the fact that we have a very large deficit still. You're still going to have a lot of people, that are going to be somewhat reluctant to buy at much lower yields unless the economy really falls out of bed, quite frankly. But then two, the front end is going to be very manipulated by the Federal Reserve and what it does for with the Fed funds rate over time. So as long as we do get a slowing economy and an easier policy from the Federal Reserve, you'd expect that yield curve to continue to steepen. And quite frankly, if we're wrong, and this is something we did put in our monthly that Tom just mentioned, is if we're wrong, we think that will bear steepen. So that means long end yields could go up while short-term yields stay where they are. And the reason for that is that supply story, right? So if we get a better economy, we have more supply, and then inflation starts to move up a little bit, you'd expect long-term yields to move higher.
How do you fold in economics? Do you believe in a better economy, Ira Jersey?
So I don't. I'm actually reasonably pessimistic on the economic
follows
outlook.
Aston Villa. This is what happens. Continue.
Well, I mean, if that were the case, I'd be very optimistic after our win last night. So in the Champions League, but if the economy does rebound, Tom, then the real risk then is you can wind up with, Treasury yields back above 4% for the 10-year, and again, a bear steepening of the yield curve, because I think the Fed will be slow to react. Like, the Fed is in this mode right now where it thinks the economy is slowing, and any short-term blips and uptick in the economy is going to, not have them reverse course anytime soon.
I mean, Adam Posenpaul was just on with the John Farrow show, and basically an economics Ira Jersey, Adam is looking for what you're calling for. Is like no one out there looking for rate stability or yield increase?
Well, so if you look at the vol market, so you look at options on Treasury futures and options on short-term interest rate futures, those are still reasonably elevated, but much lower than they had been when we were selling off and when the 10-year yield was bouncing between 4% and 5% and back down to 4.25%, right? So during that whole period, you had very elevated volatility implied by the market. That's come off a little bit, but it still remains reasonably high. So there still are people who are worried that you're going to get a massive snap. Now, the longer we stay in this range, the more likely we have people thinking that we're going to remain range bound, and you'll get what we call vol sellers. So people selling volatility to take advantage of relatively high implied volatility, and as that volatility comes down, people would benefit from the carry of receiving those premiums. The risk there, of course, is that nobody really knows what's going to happen in the future, but there have been long periods of time, even when the Federal Reserve is cutting interest rates or hiking interest rates, where the market knows that, right? So go back to the early 2000s when Paul Volcker said, "Look, we're going to be hiking at a measured pace." Everyone knew what that was. Vol completely collapsed back then because everyone knew that the Fed was going to hike in 25 base point increments. If that becomes the case again, and we have more certainty over Fed policy, then you can wind up with significantly lower implied volatility across the whole vol surface.
Tom, you mentioned Aston Villa. I mean, for full reporting here, I'll give it to you. Aston Villa beat Bayern 1-0 last night in UEFA Champions League league phase. I have no idea what that means. Why is an English team playing a German team? I have no idea, but we'll get it out there.
I was going to go there in 1 minute, but I get one more question in. But folks, this is too important, and I want to state there's no one on the Eastern Seaboard committed to children's soccer like Ira Jersey, so we got to do this. Okay, Aston Villa, they bring in a sub in the 70th minute. He puts the puck in the net 9 minutes later. But really, Ira Jersey, this was Aston Villa against Harry Kane, because the commie went over from the Tots over to Bayern Munich in Germany, right? Was that the way the game felt? Aston Villa against Harry Kane?
In many respects, it did. Something to be said about John Duran is he came from Major League Soccer. He was discovered by the Chicago Fire when he was a teenager, and then he was transferred from Major League Soccer over to Aston Villa, and he's been a super sub. So he's come off the bench and now scored, I think, 6 goals off the bench. I think the number is just this season alone. So super sub John Duran.
Ira, I'm so old. I saw the Rochester Lancers play like Lincoln was president. Ira Jersey, just simple. Is American Major League Soccer like AAA level, or is it AA level compared to Premier League?
Oh, Major League Soccer is well below. It's probably more like the 3rd division of English football, quite frankly.
Wow, see how tough he is?
Yes.
He's brutal.
I mean, what's a Champions League?
It's a champion. Well, to go to that, there's they play Premier League, they play. Farrow explained this to me, but was it after the 3rd beverage of my choice? Ira Jersey, to summarize, do the players play too much, which is really begin to percolating, isn't it?
I think they do, which is the reason why, clubs that have very deep pockets like the Manchester Cities of the world, where you can have almost 2 full squads, right? You can have 20 guys who could all be starters. Those are the teams that tend to go very far in the Champions League. So, Bayern Munich's the same way. Barcelona used to be that way, and Real Madrid currently still is. So the deeper your squad, you can then play in your domestic competition like the Premier League or the Bundesliga. And then in the Champions League, you can also go very far. So because you can rotate your squad at different times and have multiple players at each spot. So a club like Aston Villa wants to be there, but quite frankly, I'd put Aston Villa's first 11 against anyone. The problem is, can you put players 14 through 20 against the 14 through 20 of Man City? And the answer is probably not.
Yeah, we got to run, but there's no Detroit Tigers here. Liverpool, Man City, Arsenal, Chelsea, and then Aston Villa. I mean, the rich guys are all up top, right?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, Chelsea, it wasn't last year, and you certainly have other big clubs like Everton that have been struggling too. So there's a lot more investment, I think, in global football today than there had been, and people spending a lot of money.
We'll talk to Ira on October 22nd. That's when Aston Villa plays Bologna. I don't know.
It's okay.
I have no
that's
idea.
like a European.
No idea.
Bologna's good. Don't knock on Bologna.
Yeah, Pharaoh's got this all memorized with AC Milan. I have no idea what I'm talking about. I just got a note from Cy Benson who says, ask him a damn Bond question. Ira Jersey, should I buy a 3-year CD?
So I do think that yields are going to be lower. So you wind up if you're going to get into the market, especially in the front end. I think the Fed is going to cut interest rates probably a couple of 100 basis points. So so you're not likely to see these yields again until 2026 or 2027 at the earliest.
Paul, thanks for bringing that up earlier. That was huge. Ira Jersey, thank you so much. On Aston Villa, they play like this weekend again. They're exhausted. I mean,
they play all the time.
Michael Barr's exhausted listening to this. With our news in New York City, is Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. New unseen evidence in the January 6th federal election case against Donald Trump is now public. A federal judge unsealed a filing from special counsel Jack Smith, who argues Trump's actions were not the official acts of a president protected by the recent Supreme Court ruling on immunity. Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons has more from Washington.
What this really does is shed some light on the months leading up to January 6th and then the events of that day, including allegations cited by the special counsel that a White House aide ran to Trump when the insurrection was happening, when the Capitol was being invaded by these rioters and Mike Pence was being taken to safety. When the aide described what was happening with the vice president at that time, allegedly Trump just looked at him and said, "So what?"
Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons. Republican Liz Cheney, one of Donald Trump's fiercest critics, is now campaigning with Democrat Kamala Harris in Wisconsin today. It is the first stop on a 2-day presidential campaign swing for Harris. Tomorrow she plans a rally in Flint, Michigan. Meanwhile, Trump will be in Saginaw County, Michigan today. At least 9 people have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on an apartment building in Beirut overnight. Israel was pursuing a ground incursion into Lebanon against Hezbollah. The Israeli military said 8 soldiers have died in the conflict in southern Lebanon. President Joe Biden plans to tour areas devastated by Hurricane Helene in Georgia and Florida today. Yesterday, he surveyed the Carolinas from the air. At a briefing on the ground in North Carolina, the president spoke to those impacted communities.
The United States, the nation, has your back. The nation has your back. We're not leaving your back on your feet completely.
President Biden says the federal government will pick up 100% of the costs for debris removal and emergency protective measures for the next 6 months. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Okay, this happens every year, but this is a movie a long time ago. We used to wait for every spring training. Hader, who pitched for the Padres, lost for the Astros, pops $19 million a year. Skubal, who's going to win every award, makes $2.7 million a year. And the starting pitcher for the dreaded Clevelands coming up here, Tanner Beebe, who I think was playing A-ball 3 weeks ago, makes $746,000 a year. Every year we see this, don't we?
Well, keep in mind, Detroit has one of the lowest payrolls in Major League Baseball.
Hader makes more than the entire Tigers roster.
Yeah, pretty much.
There's no Al Kaline there.
No.
To build it up.
There you go.
It's just amazing.
Yeah, I mean that's you get these if you get the guaranteed contracts, once you hit it big, but they keep the cost down for a lot of these smaller markets.
Well, that's Tom and Paul money right there.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Back in the day.
We'll have to see. From New York City, Jobs Day tomorrow. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got red on the screen after initial jobless claims rose 6,000 to 225,000 last week. That was above estimates. Continuing claims, they were little changed. So right now we have NASDAQ futures up 0.2%. Same for Dow futures. S&P futures up about 0.1%. We have the 2-year yield 3.66%. That's up 2 basis points. A yield on the 10-year 3.80%, and that's up 2 basis points. Want to check commodities? We have Brent crude $75 a barrel. That's up 2%. WTI crude $71 a barrel. We have spot gold lower at $2,647 an ounce. Shares of Constellation Brands, that's a company behind Modelo, Corona beer, down more than 1%. Reported better than expected quarterly earnings, but here's the thing, it missed on sales. Beer sales rose from a year ago. Wine and spirit sales, well, they dropped. Amazon hiring for the holiday season, about 250,000 people in the U.S. That's unchanged from last year. And finally, sources say Miami Dolphins owner Stephen Ross may sell stakes in the team and other assets to private equity firm Ares Management and billionaire Joe Tsai. That's at a valuation of $8.1 billion. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Jim Carrey ought to get a cut of it. Just freebie, 1%.
Yeah, think so.
For what he did for the Miami Dolphins with... Remember it was Mask, I think. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Dan Marino was in it.
Oh, right. Okay.
Very funny.
Okay.
They stole the dolphin.
Okay, I see.
That was
okay,
the plot.
okay, that's okay.
Lisa, you remember? You're the only one in the room who's seen it. I've seen it like 14 times. Let's watch
Lisa,
Jim Carrey ought to get 1% as well. Good morning, everyone. Futures at -9, 1 day away from Jobs Day. Bloomberg surveillance are brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Trade over 10,000 U.S. stocks in ETFs, U.S. equity index options, U.S. treasuries, and more on your timetable. Learn more at ibkr.com/around the clock. ibkr.com/around the clock. We're deep into Q4. We demanded Phil Tays come in. Tays Asset Management, always interested. We get a big response when he's in. Do we dash to a bull market rally post-election?
Yeah, so my opinion is people are not prepared for the election. Right, the whole world
I'm not. We just discussed it.
Investors are not prepared for the election because everyone's still making the assumption, ironclad almost, that the Fed's going to continue to lower rates into the horizon, right? But based on what happens on election night, I'm not sure that assumption is going to hold, right? So if all of a sudden, let's keep this not political, there's a president that's elected that's proposing 17% across the board tariffs and a military chasing around immigrants, I think that's a problem. And I think that at that point, you don't have to wait for the Fed to act. At that point, the markets could adjust and say, like, what's going to happen to the future of Fed rate decreases.
And the tension here, Paul, is simple. They've asked us, all of us on our team, to clear our schedules into Saturday and Sunday following the election. Because, we're not really sure. Are we going to know, Paul?
Yeah.
Wednesday morning when you and I are here?
I don't think so. That's what the pros are telling us. But the other thing, Phil, a lot of political folks are saying, hey, when you think about, it's really about Congress. And at the end of the day, there's a 10% chance the Republicans sweep, maybe a 10% chance the Democrats sweep. But reality is the highest odds are it's gridlock.
Okay,
and nothing happens, and that is positive.
And as it pertains to fiscal stimulus, I completely agree with you.
Okay.
I think the thing that I worry about are things that presidents can do that do not require the legislature, right? And so there we're primarily talking about tariffs. So I think that's the big thing that we need to watch going into this. And so I get it. Like normally with elections, there's a lot of fear around it. The election happens. It's like, oh, nothing really played out. However, I'm in terms of the glass half full argument, I'm more the glass may be broken argument, right? So I think in terms of preparing for contingencies, people always get the timing wrong, right? They think like, oh, well, something may happen election night and we'll course correct. And the way we think of it is more like earthquake preparation for buildings. Either you're prepared or you're not. Because all of a sudden, if the markets turn down 5%,
okay.
Yeah.
But your note's not telling me go to cash. It's saying stay invested, hedge.
Hedge.
What do you hedge? How do you hedge Mag 7?
Well, so you it's hard to hedge Mag 7, but you hedge S&P 500, right? So options are still relatively inexpensive. You can buy buffer ETFs, hedged equity ETFs that have it all built in. So if the market goes off the rails, you've got this layer below it. That's key.
How about in the fixed income business here? Again, does folks stick there in the 2-year Treasury at 3.67%, or they take some credit risk here?
So right now we like high yield because there's a 3% yield advantage over intermediate duration. So that's a good place to be right now. Plus you might get some appreciation if things go well in the equity market. But our opinion is you need to be adaptive. So there it's okay to wait. If things look like they're going off the rails, change that high yield position into something more like T-bills. Or in economic duress, you kind of want to be Treasuries intermediate term to long term. So a 5 to 7 year Treasury, if it looks like things are going off the rails and all of a sudden we're not projecting Fed rate cuts, that may be the play.
In the equity biz, are there some sectors that screen well for you guys right now?
So, it's so interesting to watch this consolidation of assets in one part of the market, which has been momentum and growth for so long. So it's really hard to make that market call. Like you always want to be in tech, you want to have a position there. I think the thing still is to be an index investor right now. If you've got a 30% exposure to things like Mag 7 and growth stocks in the S&P 500, you still have exposure, but you're not overweighted because that could fall hard if the market falls.
So again, as it relates to the election here, can we just ignore it at this point? And just assume that, I don't know. Just focus on earnings and the Fed. Isn't that all I need to worry about?
I don't think so. I really don't think so. I really don't think so. I think that you've got to take action. I think you should do it while protection is cheap. So as soon as all of a sudden there's panic in the market,
I get that.
You've got to come in and get your options position now.
What do you do with Mag 7 now? Do you acquire shares with cash, or do you just stand aside?
So it wouldn't be a terrible idea to just come in. So even though Mag 7, like the triple Qs, it's not that expensive to get some options below that. Maybe a 3 months out, stagger it 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. Get some protection in there.
Okay, we're going to slow down here.
Yeah.
If you own the Mag 7, you're suggesting hedge or sell the premium on the cubes, right?
No, actually buy the triple Qs.
You want to buy the put?
Yeah, something like 5% below the market. Come in and stagger that bet. Right, so you can still get some participation. You're going to get some drag on the portfolio. Do that for 100% notional, and that's going to give you some coverage.
What's the exuberance level you see out there? You've been really good at this over the years.
So right now, we're not overly exuberant, in my opinion. And so I think
I don't see it on the street.
Right.
I just don't see it.
Absent market disruption due to something like the election, we can't forget what's going on in the Middle East right now. Right? We see buildings collapsing every day. I'm going to have to stop turning over at 3 a.m. and reading my iPhone because it's so depressing.
No,
but I got to say,
I've never done that.
But I got to say, closing the Strait of Hormuz, if Iran would do something like that, we need to address these possible contingencies too. That would be a game changer in terms of the price of oil.
Phil Tays, thank you. Tays Asset Management this morning there. Stay in the market, but hedge seems to be the message. Out on YouTube, live chat, Lisa is out on YouTube.
Really?
Straightening me out because was not encyclopedic. Are you ready? 30 years ago, 3-0?
Yeah.
30 years ago, Jim Carrey took $15 million and popped $107 million payday, gross payday.
Really?
Off of Ace Ventura, Pet Detective.
Oh.
They steal the dolphin.
Yes.
That's the plot. Dan Marino.
It's from Dan
He should just get 1% of the Miami Dolphins as a gift. He literally branded it. Melissa Robinson's the Miami Dolphins publicist. I think it's, it's Courtney Cox it's worked.
Well, the Miami Dolphins now are getting.
It was an amazing movie.
Well, the Miami Dolphins now valuation $8.1 billion.
I can't even. So Jim Carrey gets $80 million. Yeah, I think that's about right. That's what I do. Lisa, I think that's on our agenda for this weekend.
I say we
revisit
after you watch Dumb and Dumber.
I've tried to watch it. I can't get through
Dumb
it.
and Dumber
I held
first.
Lisa to such higher standards.
Yes.
But
Jim Carrey's up there.
But I just can't get through Dumb and Dumber. I failed at this.
I don't know. I think the dogs liked it. So
Vet Bill loved it.
Vet Bill loved it. So why not?
But to me, Ace Ventura is for your Oscar consideration.
All right, very good.
Thank you for that, Lisa.
Something to do.
Futures negative 12. They deteriorated a little bit, 19.80. I want to talk about the next hour. We really sat down with the team and thought about what are voices on the Eastern Mediterranean that can add value. In our next hour, Robert T. Kaplan will be with us for Too Short a Vision. I want to talk about one of his books, which was my book of the autumn, book of the election, We are 7 years on. If you're younger and asking why, go out on YouTube and watch Mr. Petty's live videos.
Let's talk some Econ 101. Sophia Drossos.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Lisa Mateo, Michael Barr. Good morning out on YouTube after your commute. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. Bloomberg Podcasts at YouTube, building each and every day. Thank you for that. On your commute, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. doing well worldwide, I should point out as well. People think it's just an American product. Good morning in a quarter, 92.9 FM Boston. They're not playing baseball. 99.1 FM Washington and Baltimore.
I had them on the tour bus in Ireland. We were listening to Little Bloomberg.
Were you really?
Yes, we were. Yep.
Really? Very.
People are like,
in
all right,
English?
that's enough. Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Really?
After a little pub stop. So
but you
people were
listen to
open.
Alex Steele, not me.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Yep,
Okay,
yep.
that's okay. But good. It's worldwide. We're really humbled by the reach that we see each and every day. And good morning, I should say, Bloomberg 1130 in New York, where the dreaded Yankees have a chance here. Thank you. Well, a ton of comments on YouTube live chat on our moment with Bucky F. Dent. We do it each and every year. Thank you to Giuseppe's father for that painful. No, Ken, we're not going to run it again. It's enough Bucky F. Dent for the next 364 days. Let's get right to it from the Interactive Broker Studios. Our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got futures falling. Investors shifting their attention to tomorrow's U.S. payroll data. And this is after applications for U.S. unemployment benefits rose slightly last week. On tap for today, we also have reports on services, factory orders, and durable goods orders. So let's get to NASDAQ futures. Now down 0.4%, 19,917. Dow futures down 0.3%, 42,351. And S&P futures down 0.2%, 5,744. We have the 2-year yield, 3.68%. That's up 3 basis points. A yield on the 10-year, 3.82%, and that's up 3 basis points. To commodities, crude oil rising for a third day. Brent crude actually on course for the longest run of daily gains since August. Right now, it's up more than 2% at $75 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate up more than 2.5% at $71 a barrel. Stocks on the move. Levi Strauss down 10%. It lowered its revenue growth outlook for the full year. And then we have a few companies making news like OpenAI, who raised $6.6 billion in its latest funding round. That's valuing the company at $157 billion. And NVIDIA shares up more than 1% after positive comments from CEO Jensen Huang about the company's Blackwell chips. Insane, he said. Yes. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. This is a joy and perfectly timed. Joining us from Point 72 Asset Management, Steve Cohen's investment shop when he's not over at Citi Field. Sophia Drossos joins us today. So Jose Quintana is everything about the Mets. He's in Venezuela doing nothing as a kid. The Mets had the best Latino program of anybody in baseball. They invented it. What's the mood at Point 72 this morning? Can Mr. Quintana get it done at 7 o'clock tonight?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Good morning. The mood's very positive. It's very exciting to be playing baseball in October, to be making the playoffs, and the team has been playing in a very exciting, impassioned way.
Nailed it. You can keep your desk. Did you notice she's wearing Mets? She's got the Balmain this morning with a Mets look on.
Smart.
You know, the blue. Sophia, to get to the effort here, out of Michigan economics as well, on the labor economy, how do you advise Point 72 on the general vector, the tone of our labor economy?
Well, in general, we've been more positive on the labor market. I think what we're seeing right now, this slowdown, is really more of a normalization. When the economy reopened after the pandemic, a lot of businesses had to start from very low employment levels. They had to offer higher wages to attract people to come in off the sidelines and come back to work. They had a lot of positions to fill. So we were really seeing these quite strong labor prints. Very outrageously strong in some ways. And we are just kind of correcting from that. And so we look at the glass as being half full. Things are moderating. Certainly, I think the unemployment rate has caught a lot of people's attention because it has picked up quite meaningfully from the recent lows. But it's not picking up because there are layoffs. The unemployment rate is rising because we are seeing more incoming labor supply, more new entrants. So for us, it's not necessarily a recessionary signal. Clearly, we're keeping an eye on it, but it looks like to me that the labor market is just transitioning out of an extremely strong, overheated patch to something that's more sustainable.
So does that suggest the Federal Reserve can be, maybe more systematic in thinking about 25 basis point cuts every meeting, every other meeting? Is it, or are they going to be front-loading some of this, do you think?
So given the strength in the labor market and in the overall economy, I think one thing that was really quite notable to me were the upward revisions we saw in the GDP data last week, showing us that there was even more forward momentum into the economy, even as the Fed is cutting rates. So it argues that the Fed can enact a more gradual path going forward after starting with a relatively large 50 basis point step.
Thank you so much for bringing this up. I've been remiss, folks, in not mentioning this upgrade. There's two ways we measure the economy. And I'm going to suggest both of them, like in the United Kingdom, was oops, it did better than we thought. Why?
Well, one of the key reasons we had the upward revisions was because of household income being revised higher and corporate profits being revised higher. So when we take a step back and we look at the economy now, it's pretty clear what's been driving consumption. What we saw on the back of the revisions is that the savings rate was revised up from, very paltry 2.9 to a much more healthy 4.8%. It's telling us that the consumers
that's a ginormous leap.
Of course.
2.9 to 4.x, right?
Yes.
Okay, the cynics are going to say, why do we get that wrong? I'm going to say, because we're all rushed and we have to wait for the revisions, right?
Yeah, the revisions are the complete picture. And so the other thing that stood out to me was the corporate profits. They remain very healthy. And for me, this is an environment that's not putting pressure on corporates to get rid of labor.
And Paul, it's a 2000 opposite. I mean, do you remember that day in 2001, Paul, when you realized the profits were a fiction?
Yeah, exactly.
In 99, 2000? Yeah. That's not where we are now.
I was seeing clients in San Francisco the day I realized, oh boy, this is big.
Exactly true.
Talk to us about the consumer here. How is the consumer? The consumer, I guess, has a job if he or she wants it. Real wages are going up. It feels like the consumer should be in decent shape, yet I know there's a bifurcation out there.
Of course. So in aggregate, the consumer, I think, is benefiting from the fact that inflation is falling and their purchasing power is increasing. And also, I would point out very specifically, gasoline prices have declined. That obviously is a big part of the consumer wallet. So with gasoline prices and broader inflation declining, there is more budget to spend on other things. And yes, there is some bifurcation with perhaps higher end consumers doing better because they're also benefiting from the asset side of their balance sheet, from their homes and their portfolios. But even for the lower end consumer, help is on the way. The Fed's already started its rate cuts.
Dean Mackey does exquisite narrow work. I mean this with all acclaim, and Sophia, you're the same way. It's wonderful to think of Mackey and Drossos dovetailing together. What's your unknown on the Mackey spreadsheet right now?
My unknown. Well, luckily, I've been working with Dean. We've had a great call on the consumer, and that is his background. As you know, he's done a lot of research. So, and at the Fed, this was something that he was very well known for inside of the building. So for me, it's, are we going to continue to be right on the fact that we've gotten the supply side adjustments, income is holding up very well, corporate profits are holding up very well, and we're just going to transition into continued economic expansion, given a lot of the volatility that we've seen in market doesn't seem to be impacting the real economy. So
were you at Michigan with Claudia's son?
It's really funny. We both worked for the same professor, but I'm a touch older than Claudia, so
well preserved,
older and wiser.
It's an amazing
we worked for Matthew Shapiro, your friend, Dr. Shapiro.
Matthew Shapiro, Paul. There was this point. It was Ned Gramlich, who we lost way too early, like Rudy Dornbush. But Michigan became the inflation study combine, sort of linked in with the Cleveland Fed. And it was led by this guy, Matt Shapiro. And you'd look at it and you'd go, why was all this inflation brilliance there at the time?
Right.
I mean, what was it that Michigan was doing at the time to own inflation research?
I think there was a lot of focus on consumer and consumer perceptions and what was going on with inflation expectations and the price setting process. As you know, Michigan has a big survey research center as well. So there were a lot of things.
Conferencing and all that.
Yeah, that's right. There were a lot of things that worked in tandem together. Yeah.
Sophia, thank you so much. Sophia Drossos there is suggesting the Mets may pull it off tonight. She's wearing Mets blue, which is very important here in New York City. 7 p.m. is that game. Far too late for me. Michael Barr will watch every moment of it. VIX up a stick. We're going to get a 20 print on the VIX, 19.93 right now. For those who keep score on that, that's important. Futures at negative 16, Dow futures negative 168, 20 minutes away from the opening. I thought a pretty quiescent claims report. We'll get some other data, and of course the jobs report will go beneath the headline data tomorrow. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa. Israeli planes bombed Beirut and traded hostilities with Hezbollah fighters in southern Lebanon as the country's forces kept up their campaign against the Iran-backed militant group. 9 people died in the center of the Lebanese capital after an Israeli strike on a medical site affiliated with Hezbollah. It comes after Israel said 8 of its troops were killed in battles against Hezbollah. Bloomberg's Jamal Ambersechi is in Dubai.
So what we're seeing in Lebanon right now is conflict on the ground, but then a continuation of the airstrikes that started last week. And all of this is part and parcel of the new war objective that Israel introduced 2 weeks ago now, and saying that it was necessary for them to conduct this mission in order to dislodge Hezbollah from South Lebanon and to allow residents of the north to return home.
Bloomberg's Jemana Bersenchi. Vice President Kamala Harris will campaign in Wisconsin with a special guest, Liz Cheney, once the 3rd highest ranking House Republican. Last month, Liz Cheney announced, along with her father, former Vice President Dick Cheney, that she is endorsing Harris because of the risk she says that Donald Trump poses to our democracy. Meanwhile, former President Trump will speak this afternoon in Saginaw, Michigan. It is his 12th visit to the state during this campaign. This will be Trump's first public appearance since Special Counsel Jack Smith's brief was unsealed alleging the former president's attempts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson.
So we're here because Jack Smith had to go back to the trial court judge, Judge Chutkan, and say, I can move forward with this case. I know what the Supreme Court said. I know they created this broad immunity, but virtually everything that you see before you is about private conduct, no immunity. Let's go and have this trial.
Professor Levinson on CBS. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. A piercing news release yesterday. The Walt Disney Company, DIS, will host a live audio Q&A Thursday, November 14th.
Oh, boy.
Is anything going to get fixed by Thursday, November 14th?
I don't think so. No, I mean, I think the all people are looking for is just a trajectory to profitability on the streaming business. That's it. And I think we have a pretty good view on it.
How do you do that at $9 a month this week only?
Exactly. No, they're getting there. They're making progress.
Really, you think they're getting there?
They are, absolutely. So it's just a question of ramping that thing up.
We'll do more on this. I think it's amazing. Bloomberg's surveillance.
Now look at some local headlines.
Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Futures Report brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Markets never sleep, and neither does Interactive Brokers. Discover opportunities with CME Group futures across equity indices, interest rates, FX, energy, and more. Access CME futures around the clock at Interactive Brokers. All right, futures still lower. This is ahead of jobs day tomorrow. Right now we have NASDAQ futures down 0.5%, Dow futures down 0.3%, same for S&P futures. We have the two-year yield 3.67%. That's up 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.82%, and that's up 3 basis points. Few companies making news. That's Eli Lilly. The FDA says its weight loss diabetes drugs, they're no longer in short supply, and that's putting shares of some copycats under pressure, like telehealth company Hims and Hers Health, down now 12%. And we'll stick with health. Aura Health rolled out its next generation smart ring. It has double the number of sensors, and it'll run you just under $350. And finally, I've seen them on the softball fields. Paul, maybe you've seen them on the beach. I'm talking about bog bags.
Yes.
You know, they're the bright tote bags with the holes. They look like Crocs.
What's up about that?
Yes. Apparently, American moms are buying them like crazy. So Bloomberg Business Week says the company's nearing $100 million in sales from those bags.
All right.
They range between $70, $90. That's how much they run.
I am so out of touch.
Bog bags.
Yeah.
Yes.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. This weekend we had a meeting back and forth, you know, the cell phones and all that, saying who are the 5 people we want to talk to about all that we see in the Middle East. At the top of the list was Robert D. Kaplan. A year ago, I made The Loom of Time my book of the year. It is brilliant. And as Kaplan says, get out the map. I mean, that's what you do. And right now, we're going to get out the map on the Eastern Mediterranean with Robert Kaplan. And Robert, I've never done this, but I have a book of the election, a book of autumn, and it is your book, The Tragic Mind. It's 115 pages, folks, deep. It's a dense book. I'm not going to mince words. And there you are, Robert Kaplan. Imperial wars are decided by fate. What is the fate of the Eastern Mediterranean?
Tom, I think the fate of the Eastern Mediterranean is that we will be in this cycle of wars, ceasefires, negotiations until there is a domestic change in the regime inside Iran. Remember, the Cold War ended not because of a battle was won or anything international. It ended because of a domestic reason. The Soviet system collapsed. And I think at some point the regime in Iran will transform, transition, or collapse on its own, not from an invasion or anything.
Right.
And at that point, the whole Middle East will be different. You'll see diplomatic relations between Iran and Israel, lots of other big changes. But the key thing to watch here is that if the Israeli attack can do something, the Israeli counterattack can do something that will seriously embarrass the regime in Tehran in the minds of its own people.
Yeah, but on November 4th, 1979, here's the difference, folks. I was in a bar in Killington, Vermont. Robert Kaplan was living what we saw in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Iranian hostage crisis. It's basically been a consistent theology the whole time. Do you sense a point now where the theology of Iran can be defeated to a newer, better political system?
Yes, I do. Because Iran is a country of a narrow clique of North Koreans running a whole country of South Koreans, essentially. The people are absolutely cynical about the regime. 80-90% of the population hates the regime, which has destroyed the currency, destroyed the middle class. There is no love lost between the regime and its people. And the regime is now in a calcified, decadent, late Soviet phase. So I think the big change is going to be domestic upheaval in Iran, and the thing to watch for is how the Israelis select their targets for their counterattack that could worsen the domestic situation in Iran.
So, Robert, what type of targets would you recommend to the Israelis here? Because the talk is, do they target some of the nuclear facilities? What would be your recommendation?
First of all, a good target match would be the port at Bandar Abbas and some of the other ports and oil terminals that could just cut off their income, which would be immediately felt by the man in the street. Not immediately, but after a month or two, by the man in the street in Tehran. That's one target set. Another target set is simply by targeting and taking out a good deal of the nuclear facilities or the missile facilities, you would deeply embarrass the regime and make it hard to have a second or third counterattack. And the stars are aligned for this because Hezbollah, though far from being defeated, is weaker now than it's ever been. Gaza, though Hamas is far from being completely defeated, is weaker now than it's ever been. So in terms of regional repercussions against Israel from an attack, the Israelis are in a very positive situation at this moment.
Robert Kaplan, I asked this question yesterday. Let me ask it of you, and it's informed by an article in The Atlantic 24 years ago, where the return of ancient times, where you talked about Rabin. What would Yitzhak Rabin think about the Netanyahu method?
Yitzhak Rabin, first of all, would not be the leader of such a right-wing extreme Israeli government. Yitzhak Rabin was comfortable negotiating with people who, frankly, with Americans who, frankly, were much smarter than the Biden administration. President Biden made a big mistake in the last 48 hours. He said publicly that Israel should not attack the Iranian nuclear facilities. That's something you communicate privately, not publicly, because you should never tell your enemy what you're not going to do. Never take anything off the table. Yitzhak Rabin was a really wily operator. And I think now, given this situation right at this moment, Yitzhak Rabin would hit Iran very hard. So though Rabin and Netanyahu are from two opposite ends of the political spectrum in Israel, at this moment they would be they would be aligned.
We're out of time. Robert Kaplan, thank you so much. I really can't say enough about a book for America that is trying to look forward. It is Tragedy, by Robert D. Kaplan. It's dense. I'm not going to mince words. It's 115 pages, and it's a really, really dense yet important read. Controversial. It'll make you think about where we've come from the World War II generation on to where we are now and where will we be forward. Robert Kaplan with us on the Eastern Mediterranean. Paul, I look at this, and all I can say is there's so much punditry out there, and I just want to talk to experts. I just feel like I'm worn out by punditry from a distance.
Yep, and Robert Kaplan is certainly one of those.
He's always controversial, but to be direct, I mean, he was on the ground in Baghdad as it blew up a year before the invasion.
Yep.
I mean, he's someone that's always been out there doing it. I've got a predilection because he's like, get out the map, which is a good way to go. We are 23 hours from Jobs Day, and I'd say, we just heard from 0.72.
Yep.
They say the glass is half full. Others say the glass is half empty. My head's spinning into this Jobs Day. I have no idea what to expect.
No, again, the consensus, Tom, on the Bloomberg terminal, 150,000. The whisper number, WHIS, is something lower than that. And again, Tom, we've had experts in here that can see numbers, on either side of that 150 number pretty consistently. But it'll be important for this Federal Reserve because clearly they are focused on the labor market.
Huge response. You're in Ireland listening to Bloomberg Radio?
Yeah, we got it on there.
How'd you do that?
Just on the, the app here, and we just kind of
on the cell phone
and put it right over the speakers of the bus, and people are like, "What the heck am I listening to? Why do I care about Turkish lira? I'm on vacation."
70 people from Oslo.
Exactly. No, from the Midwest retirement community, a big contingent from the villages down in Florida. They were with us. Yeah.
Okay, we'll have to get a brief. I mean,
sure.
I didn't realize this. This is like a hell of a sabbatical. Exactly. It's better than what I'm doing. Stay with us. Bloomberg Surveillance on YouTube.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. Now, some more economic data out this morning for investors to look over. We had initial jobless claims. They rose 6,000 to 225,000 last week. That was above estimates. Continuing claims, they were little changed. Tomorrow, the focus shifts to U.S. payrolls data. Let's see how the markets react at the open. Right now, let's start with the S&P 500, down about 0.2%, 13 points at 5,696. We have the Dow down 0.2%, 120 points, 42,080. And the NASDAQ down 0.3%, 67 points at 17,858. We head over to the two-year yield, 3.67%, up 3 basis points. A yield on the 10-year, 3.81%, and that's up 3 basis points. To commodities, we have spot gold lower, $2,650 an ounce. We have Brent crude, $75 a barrel. WTI crude, $71 a barrel. Quick look at currencies. We have the dollar stronger, Japanese yen, euro, British pound weaker. We have Bitcoin down about 0.5% at around 60,000. At the open, also checking with shares of Levi Strauss down 10%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Thank you. I want to make a note here about the power of the Bloomberg Professional Service. Nigeria is, just as a generalization, blowing up. They let their currency go about 18 months ago. It's the Naira, N-A-I-R-A.
Okay.
So, you go, well, what's it mean? And the answer is they got a 72% devaluation, which is like untenable. We'll have to follow that. I don't know what to make of it, but that's the oddity, the global reach. Thank you, Damian Sassower, for that.
He's calling out the Nigerian.
He's looking at the Nigerian
Naira.
We say good
spot
morning.
price.
Not looking at the Nigerian Naira is Jim Paulson. Thrilled. It's been way too long with Paulson's perspectives, writing on your desire to be in the markets and participate with all the worries and fears you have out there. What's the level of fear out there right now, Jim Paulson, in this great bull market?
Well, Tom, first, it's great to be back. Like I said, it's been a long time. The Twins have failed again to make the playoffs.
That's why we had you on. I said, if they're, August, the Twins look great, and then it collapsed. Let's get Paulson on.
It's too soon.
Yeah.
Confidence has been a real issue, an outlier issue ever since the pandemic, Tom. One of the interesting aspects, it kind of took a hit, and post-pandemic, it's never really recovered in any meaningful fashion compared to historic norms. And it's particularly interesting that we've been in a economic recovery now for 4 years and a bull market for almost 2 years. And still, we got confidence measures, whether you look at the Consumer Confidence Index or you look at the Small Business Confidence Index, that are closer to post-war lows, like we're in the midst of recession the whole time, rather than up reflecting an ongoing recovery in a bull market. It's been a puzzle. I think there's a lot of factors at work in that. But I do think one of the big ones has been the Fed's sort of backward approach to this cycle. This is the only Fed, Tom, that stayed in an easing position the whole way up of inflation, as it went from 0.5% to 9.1% consumer price inflation in mid-2022. It basically didn't even start tightening till it peaked. And then it tightened all the way down as inflation went from 9.1 to 2.5. No other Fed has done that. They generally always raise rates during major inflations and reduce them when it disinflates. And I think that created a lot of fallout, and one of them has been confidence. We've had this recovery in the last 2 years in bull market without the support of monetary support, without other support that we usually get. And as a result, I think confidence has been waning, not only because of that, but for other factors. And that's generally a big support for recoveries in bull markets as well. We just aren't getting the animal spirits in the economy, nor really aggressive behaviors in the stock market.
Jim, is part of that inflation? I mean, a lot of folks will say, okay, the inflation rate is down to where the Fed, is more comfortable with it. But boy, those absolute prices that we're paying in the grocery stores and so on, man, that's tough to take still.
I think you're right, Paul. I mean, that's part of the issue. What's interesting about that, though, is if you look back at the In past inflationary episodes we've had, generally you get a fairly good bouncing confidence once the inflation rate does come back down. And we really didn't get that in here. I think there's a host of reasons. I think we've had, that was a mighty frightening predicament with the pandemic scare. It wasn't a war, but we had a death count that left a legacy, and it isolated everybody for a period of time. It certainly screwed up supply chains. We've had a stream of 24/7 news flow and bad news. We've geopolitical events going on. We got a political election with an equally divided country. There's a lot of things, but certainly inflation has been one of them.
Jim Paulson with us, of course, with all of the Midwest heritage that he had, with a wonderful career on Wall Street. There was a governor of Minnesota that got some FaceTime the other night. I don't want you to go into the politics of it, Jim Paulson, but he alluded to it gently, and it's a not so gentle issue, which is we have a 2025 farm crisis upon us. Color for us right now with corn down, Minnesota leading in oats. Down. Farming comes down 8%, maybe within all of the Midwest. How close are we to a farm crisis?
Well, I do think it's a problem. There typically is. Commodity prices in general, Tom, are down 30% from their peak levels during the pandemic, and certainly agriculture prices are down even more over that period of time. We've also had a really, until just recently, a very strong dollar. I think the DXY dollar index reached something like 115, 114 at its peak. A year ago, it was 107 still. It's now down to like 101. But that strength of the dollar is a huge thing for domestic agricultural, because a lot of farmers, the produce doesn't even go domestically. It goes to international markets. And when you raise the value of the dollar, it depresses their pricing overall domestically, so that foreigners can afford it, I guess, and really reduces operations. The question for agriculture is how much leverage did they have in their operations here? And I think at least that's been less leverage as far as their balance sheets than it used to be, for example, in the 1970s leading up to the 80s, agriculture crisis.
I mean, Paul, I can see in this 1,141 acres, 12 beds, 8 baths, 12,000 square feet, $11 million. Whoa. Sort of near the Mayo Clinic. Yeah. It's like, it's a farm. I mean, I could see you slide into that, Paul.
Sure, absolutely. So, Jim, if we go, how are the farmers doing? If you did all your academic work at Iowa State, I mean, nobody gets a better view than the good folks out there. How is the American farmer doing?
Well, I don't think they're in crisis mode like they have been a lot. I mean, basically from 1980, the 1980s was an absolute disaster, even for my small hometown in Iowa and surrounding area. And I don't think it's ever come back ever since, Paul, in any meaningful way. And some of the major cities are still, reeling from that, from what they used to be. But it's not like that again. And I think there's less debt involved in agricultural. There's less family operations. There's more corporate operations today that have changed it. I think basically the crops have been okay weather-wise out here, so that's good. But certainly the commodity prices are something you're going to hear about in the coffee shops, no doubt about it. They're too low.
John Deere, last 10 years per year after the pandemic explosion, up 19.5% per year. Nice. Somebody's buying tractors.
Somebody's buying tractors, exactly right. So, Jim, do you side with the Fed here that they've got a soft landing? Actually, we're seeing it right now.
I think so, Paul. We've got. What I'm most impressed by is just the amount of positive force that's now finally being brought to this recovery, and also the corollary bull market. We have now falling short-term interest rates, falling long-term bond yields, rising money supply growth, rising fiscal stimulus, continued disinflation, the power of disinflation. We have positive real GDP growth, and the one remaining element that we typically get is rising confidence on Main Street, which we haven't gotten, but there's some early signs. That's a lot of positive force, not only for the economic growth continuing, but also for the stock market to keep going up. And I I think we've got a soft landing. The bigger question may be, it might grow too hot again in the next year for the Fed to ease a lot more. That might be an ongoing question.
Jim Paulson, thank you. Jim Paulson with Paulson's Perspectives. Good to get his view there from the Midwest. Next time he's on, we'll devote the entire segment to the Minnesota Vikings. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. U.S. prosecutors say Donald Trump should stand trial for his private crimes in trying to overturn the 2020 election. The newly unsealed court filing alleges that when told that Vice President Mike Pence could be in danger at the Capitol on January 6th, the former president replied simply, "So what?" The special counsel filing comes after the U.S. Supreme Court held that presidents, in many instances, cannot face charges for official acts while in office. Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons has more from Washington.
There were 80 pages of evidence in this 165-page filing that was partially redacted, that was unsealed by the judge last night. I would note this case, this 2020 election interference case, the January 6th case, is not going to go to trial before the election, but we could see more motions like this. There's the Trump response that will be due in a few weeks, and then the government will have a chance to respond by the end of October, so just days before the election.
Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons. Former First Lady Melania Trump reportedly writes in her new book that abortion is a woman's fundamental right, clashing with her husband's views on the issue. That's according to The Guardian reporting about the former First Lady's upcoming memoir. And reportedly writing, she has carried this belief through her entire adult life. Israel's warplanes bombed Beirut overnight after 8 of its soldiers were killed in southern Lebanon in battles against Hezbollah. Local officials say 9 people died in the Israeli strike on a building affiliated with Hezbollah in the center of the Lebanese capital. President Joe Biden plans to tour Hurricane Helene disaster areas in Georgia and Florida today. Yesterday, he surveyed the Carolinas from the air. At a briefing on the ground in North Carolina, the president spoke to impacted communities.
I approve the request of Governor Cooper for the federal government to cover 100% of all the costs for debris removal, emergency protective measures, for 6 months.
The death toll from the storm has topped 180. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Week 5, Thursday Night Football. Nobody cares. The Vikings play the Lions not once but twice this year. I think it's October 20. Will be interesting. But before that, the Vikings face off against the New York Jets.
In London.
Yeah. You know, I mean, there it is. And I'm sorry. It's like the worst weekend for the New York Jets since time began.
And that's a 9 o'clock start, by the way, if you're on the East Coast.
Yep.
9 a.m.?
A.M.
Yeah. On the NFL Network. Minnesota 2.5-point favorites here. Yep. So, but if you're the Jets, you got to get something going here now. But that's a tough game, though.
Yeah, and you know Aaron Rodgers and Coach Salah, they say they're fine, but let's see how the cadence goes.
There's some tension there.
There is.
Why is there tension? Do we have a why yet?
I still, they say they're fine, but okay.
I don't know anything. I can see it.
Body language.
It's like vet bill and kennel fee. They're the same way. Brockton, can you make a note? Can we get Belsky in here at some point? Tell him we don't want to, Brian Belsky's nailed the bull market call. I don't care. I just want to talk to him about the Minnesota Vikings. Just tell him no bull market chat. I don't want to hear the Belsky blather, paragraph to paragraph. We want to hear, Michael Barr and I want to hear from Brian Belsky, where'd the Vikings come from? Why can't the Jets do that?
And they've had injuries. I'm shocked. So good for them.
Well, we'll have to see on that. Thank you for that update. Jets Vikings this weekend. Sweeney will be there in London. Down negative 250 points right now. The VIX 19.89. Bloomberg surveillance.
Now a look at some local headlines making news.
Television and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have stocks slipping, thoughts of escalating conflict in the Middle East, kind of softening that risk appetite right now. We have NASDAQ down about 6 points at 17,918. We have the Dow down 321 points, 41,871. And the S&P 500 down 17 points, 5,693. One head over to commodities. Crude oil extending its gains right now. Brent crude $75 a barrel. WTI crude $71 a barrel. And U.S. listed China stocks sliding after big gains this week. We'll head over to the 2-year yield, 3.67%, up 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 3.81%, and that's up 2 basis points. A few companies making news. That's PayPal. It completed its first business payment using its stable coin that was launched last year. And Uber and AV Ride, they're joining forces to bring AV Ride's delivery robots, autonomous vehicles to Uber and Uber Eats. So it's starting in Austin in the coming weeks, expanding to Dallas and then to Jersey City, New Jersey. And more charities, distant relatives, even pets benefiting from surprise inheritances. The Wall Street Journal says it's because people are choosing not to have kids. So that's becoming a little bit more common. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
They're giving their pets money?
Yes. Well, they're leaving money to be dedicated to taking care of the pets. Yes.
All right.
You have to make sure the babies are taken care of.
All right. I'll leave that to you, pet people.
We'll have to see on that. There is an election. Balance of Power is looking at this, and it's tick by tick, day by day, literally hour by hour, for Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines. Kaylee Lines joins us right now. Kaylee, I want to pretend there's not an election, because if there wasn't, we would be focused on the President of the United States. I believe the President will consider the devastation of the South today. Any number of other articles in the Washington Post talking about the President and the Eastern Mediterranean. What do you expect out of the President, literally in the next 24 hours, on Israel?
Well, he's certainly going to have to continue to field questions about it, Tom, as he did yesterday when he was boarding Air Force One on the way to survey the devastation in the Carolinas. He'll today be in Georgia and Florida to see more of Hurricane Helene's impacts there, all the while likely being briefed and potentially being asked by reporters about what he expects Israel is going to do to retaliate against Iran's strike from earlier this week, making it clear yesterday that he does not support Israel striking Iran's nuclear sites. And we know that's something that's very difficult for Israel to do without the support of the U.S. because these are facilities buried deep underground in Iran. But clearly there's concern about the potential escalatory nature of this and consequences.
Is shuttle diplomacy dead?
Well, that's a great question, Tom. We've been asking that of a lot of people. Is this a sign that diplomacy is not really going to continue to work in the Middle East, as we have seen Secretary of State Antony Blinken, CIA Director Bill Burns, Amos Hochstein, who of course advises the president on energy and matters of the Middle East, any number of officials going there trying to push for a ceasefire, restraint on the part of Israel with basically no success to show for it. There's been very little in terms of tangible outcome of much of this diplomatic action. They tried to use diplomacy to stop the escalation between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, and instead what we have gotten is a ground incursion into Lebanon as Israel retaliates for the strikes that have been coming from Hezbollah into Israel's north. So it's just very unclear what leverage and influence the U.S. has been able to exercise in this region and specifically within the Netanyahu government, because the U.S. is still saying we will continue to support Israel's defense. And if that remains true, then what incentive does Israel have to listen to your guidance?
To what extent is the White House, the administration, members of Congress concerned that this regional war could actually expand significantly from here now that Iran is being brought into it?
There's major concern about that, Paul. Yesterday, I was speaking with Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, who's a Marine combat veteran. He did several tours in Iraq. We were talking about what Iran could likely do to retaliate and, frankly, what would happen if Israel were to choose to strike Iran's nuclear sites. And what he told us was it's just very unclear what would happen next. If Iran would actually take that as a sign that its development is at risk in terms of its nuclear capacity, and instead of just developing the materials needed to create nuclear weapons, actually rush to make the weapons themselves, something that could make the world significantly more dangerous. So it's the concern of how calibrated these moves need to be for Israel to strike back in a proportionate way. As we've heard the president say, that isn't going to mean Iran ratchets up things further and potentially draws more entities into this conflict, including American troops who, yes, have been involved defensively in shooting down missiles that have been aimed at Israel. We've put thousands more troops into the region. There's an aircraft carrier and strike group obviously present, but the concern that American lives could be put at risk is really foremost for the considerations here in Washington.
And Kayla, I know you nailed this at UVA years ago with the, all the good work they've done there at the Miller Center. Okay, fine. What leverage do we have on Israel to the north, to the south, and frankly to the east to Iran? Where is our strength, our power, our leverage with Israel?
Well, our leverage, Tom, is our weapons. We provide Israel with the means to defend itself and replenishing the Iron Dome and providing the bombs that they need to carry out a lot of this. And that is not something that easily can be taken away. Certainly it wouldn't go down well politically as we're getting closer to an election. Republicans would be incredibly up in arms if this administration were to prevent Israel from securing the weapons it needs. If you remember the withholding of the large bombs over concern of civilian casualties in Gaza, the administration caught a lot of flack for that. So that really becomes the question. Kamala Harris, for example, has been repeatedly pressed on if she would support an arms embargo to Israel. She has said no. And if you're not going to stop the flow of weapons, what can you do? And the answer, frankly, is not all that much, especially when Bibi Netanyahu knows an election is about to happen and he's going to be dealing with a completely different administration come January of 2025.
Kaylee, thanks so much. Look forward to the 12 noon effort, Balance of Power, at 5 p.m. tonight as well. Kayla Lines with Joe Matthew. Thank you. Thank you. I remember this well. Program notes here. We just huge response here to talking about the dogs leaving money.
Yeah, that's.
I revisited this. Miss Helmsley, Leona Helmsley, left trouble.
Oh, okay.
$12 million.
Nice.
What? The judge said, this is great. The judge said, no. So he cut it down to $2 million.
Okay. All right.
What did trouble do with the money? He's out on the town.
High point of the day, folks, and this goes way back. Paul and I are in here like at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Tucker slides in later. And on a Thursday, we got Tucker in Levi's.
Yes.
I mean, this was noted
he is,
today.
I know.
It's a very
I'm
rare
a Levi
and
guy
unusual. Look here now, and I had somebody out on YouTube live chat. Thank you for that. What kind of dad pants are you wearing? Are you going
These
with
are
the
like
Levi's 550s?
these have special threads in them that like expand
We
with my waistline.
Dad pants. Is what
Yeah, absolutely. Why not?
call those. We thank John Tucker for this. Does this signal that you're off tomorrow?
Yes, it does signal that. I am in the
you.
car headed somewhere right after work and then just kick back and enjoy myself
The Helix
in my
You're
Levi's.
heading for the Lincoln Tunnel, right?
I'll be sitting in traffic till tomorrow morning.
Michelle
John
Gass,
Tucker,
Levi
thank you.
Strauss president and CEO. Tom, we're going to do a simulcast with Bloomberg Television and Radio, 10:30 a.m.
That's important.
this morning. And so the stock is trading down about 8%. They had some weaker than expected guidance, calling out China and some other parts of the market. So we'll get the latest on that, Tom.
And we're wedded to it. I mean, it's not a Dow Jones Industrial Average stock, but
it's an American
I
stock.
remember the coronary my father had when he figured out a pair of jeans cost more than $9.99.
Exactly.
I mean, it was like, major family tension.
Yep. It's a company based in San Francisco, 19,000 employees. Tom's got about a market cap
American
7.6
heritage,
billion. It's American heritage, right?
Tucker's wearing, I was busting his chops. He's wearing the Japan Salvage.
I don't think so.
Like $800 a pair.
Oh, yeah, right. Uh-huh.
Exactly.
No,
Nice.
these were purchased at Kohl's.
Kohl's.
I would have
Really?
gone online to Levi, whatever, their site.
.com.
Had I,
Right.
known it
Had it in a
existed.
computer.
I think that's the push now.
Yeah,
To
e-commerce.
Yeah.
You
Well,
can do it
whatever.
all.
Little
Absolutely.
green on the
Just
screen on
internet. We'll show it
NASDAQ
to you.
100. It's an insane NASDAQ 100. Thank you to the leadership NVIDIA for that new securities analysis word, insane.
Yep.
The Dow, negative 300. That's important here. We're watching oil as well. Oil up 2.6%. Brent crude 75.80. We're going to get a 76 print on Brent crude at some point. We'll be here tomorrow for Jobs Day. Chris Whitley, Boys and Girls. Good morning, everyone.